Hero Mujin is locked in a fierce duel with Captain Jinboin, and he's toyed with him like a helpless infant, effortlessly evading every strike right there on the stage. This shatters Jinboin's composure, as he screams for the protagonist to face him head-on like a true warrior. Mujin touches down gracefully on the floor, heaving a massive 100 kilograms blade as if it weighed nothing at all. As the two rivals lunge toward one another, Mujin abruptly retracts his steel and crashes it violently against the edge of Jinboin's blade, parrying the weapon and seizing a lethal opening. He buries a fist into Jinboin's face with such force his nose nearly collapses, sending him spiraling to the dirt. The spectators are paralyzed with fear because they've never seen him this dominant before. To grasp how the protagonist can treat a captain like a common amateur, we must return to where it all began. Our lead was once feared as the legendary demon god, a top-tier master who walked a solitary path of the blade, confronting 9 elite sect masters to sate his hunger for vengeance. His transcendent and hair-raising swordsmanship permitted him to trade blows with the world's greatest grandmasters. He carved through them with surgical accuracy, leaving the crowd baffled at how he achieved such impossible feats. Before long, his enemies were slaughtered one by one, forcing them to accept a single, terrifying reality: that the protagonist is an absolute freak of nature. Even when the few, who remained standing, finally managed to corner him and run a blade through his heart, he refused to fall and ushered them all into the afterlife, forever etching the dark legend of the demon god. As the light faded from his eyes, his entire journey flickered before him, and he felt a sense of peace, knowing his bloody task was finished. The protagonist recalls being jumped by 3 boys for being a bratty troublemaker in Murim. He was rescued and taken in by his venerable master. But when all was said and done, he spent his days defined by the sword, taking countless lives. He questioned if his existence was truly meant for nothing but killing. At that precise moment, the image of his late wife filled his mind. The only true happiness he ever knew was spent by her side. Yet those precious memories, too, were cruelly stolen away. Through bitter tears, he searched for the hidden meaning of his life. And then, he finally drew his last breath. Suddenly, he is jolted awake by chaotic shouting all around him, convinced he had woken up in the depths of hell, until he opens his eyes to find a pack of arrogant fools insulting him. The protagonist is utterly bewildered because he has no inkling of what's happening. Standing by his side are 2 youths. The boy defends his older brother, swearing they won't surrender the clan's secret techniques while he still breathes. The boy vows that no matter the cost, the hidden arts must remain with the Wa family, while the protagonist is still trying to process his surroundings. The leader of the rival faction proposes a deal to settle the dispute, offering a payout since his clan is currently destitute and starving. In return, Mujin must wager the family's secrets on a duel, a winner-takes-all showdown. The boy is paralyzed with dread because his brother, the protagonist, is a total amateur at combat. Mujin, annoyed by the constant bickering, accidentally snaps at the crowd. Who the hell is this one Mujin person? Even though he realizes he is inhabiting another man's body. The children claiming to be his siblings are speechless, staring at him like he's lost his mind. Even his rival is stunned, and Mujin boldly declares that he is the demon god. This only triggers a fit of laughter. The rival tells Mujin to call him the king of hell then, revealing this pest is Du Bo, the second young master of the Yunhua merchant group. Mujin's siblings are horrified, fearing his mental state has finally snapped completely. Even the head of the Yunhua merchant group, Bu Zhong, sneers that the Wa legacy is doomed. Because the heir is clearly insane, Mujin stays quiet, attempting to piece the puzzle together. Taking his silence as consent, Du Bo declares the duel will happen at Byongak next month. Du Bo warns Mujin that they are bound by the laws of the Murim, and there is no escape. Once the intruders vanish, the 2 siblings demand to know his plan for the upcoming battle, especially since Mujin has never even gripped a hilt before. Mujin bursts into laughter at the thought, for the sword is his very soul and reason for being. He attempts to channel energy to his core, only to realize his internal power is non-existent. Not a single spark remains within him. A wave of gloom hits as he realizes this new vessel is pathetic and brittle. His younger sister collapses into tears, screaming for Mujin to snap out of it. She brands Mujin a coward and a fool for letting a merchant group humiliate them. The younger brother barks at her to show respect to their sibling, but she won't listen. She screams that Mujin is the reason their parents are dead, before sprinting away in a fit of sobbing. The boy bows an apology, explaining that his sister often lets her emotions boil over. After his apology, he leaves as well. Mujin is left in total shock. He can't fathom that even children despise him and think he's a lunatic. Mujin is spiraling. His last clear memory was the brutal massacre of his sect leaders without a shred of mercy. Mujin assumed he would finally find eternal rest. Yet here he is, trapped in a completely foreign body. He sinks to the ground in agony, wondering who those children were. Just then, a frantic man, his personal assistant, rushes toward him, demanding to know why he dragged his broken body out of bed. He was worried, sick. But Mujin only stares, asking for the stranger's identity. Sak is horrified, convinced Mujin is having another mental break. Believing it's amnesia, he begins to explain his history. It turns out Mujin was once a prodigy that every righteous sect fought to recruit. And by age 23, he led the clan. Sak is exhausted because he's told this tale over 6,000 times. Mujin finds it hard to believe he was a genius when his core is ruined. He demands to know about this madness. Sak sighs and begins the tragic retelling. 17 years ago, Mujin and Du Bo had a secret sparring match, vowing not to use internal arts. Mujin was 6 and Du Bo was 9. Du Bo gave his word, and the childhood rivalry began. But as the fight intensified, Du Bo betrayed the pact and delivered a strike infused with deadly internal energy straight into Mujin. A devastated Mujin asked why he used the 7 injuries fist during a fair fight. Du Bo only smirked, boasting that the lethal technique was a gift from the Kontong sect, and its lingering damage is catastrophic. It turns out Du Bo had already used this move to ruin his own brother, leaving him a hollow shell in a sickbed. Basking in his cruelty, Du Bo was thrilled to see Mujin suffer the same fate. In short, Mujin is branded a lunatic because everyone assumes his mental state is a lingering rot from that 7 injuries fist. Mujin is seething. Du Bo is the coward who crippled him, yet now he has the gall to demand a formal challenge. Mujin grills Sak on how the family handled Du Bo after that treacherous backstab. Sak admits that Mujin's own father was the one who made the ultimate decision to let it slide. Even though Du Bo is kin, he's the heir to the Manhwa merchant group, a top 10 titan of the Central Plains. Despite the life-altering damage Du Bo inflicted, Mujin's father merely gave him a slap on the wrist. Mujin is floored that the man was spineless enough to excuse someone who destroyed his own flesh and blood. Mujin decides this entire clan is absolute garbage and demands to know where his parents are. Sak reveals that Mujin's condition only spiraled further into darkness, leaving his father drowning in a sea of debt from a desperate, failed search for a miracle cure. 9 years ago, his mother's health finally gave out, and she passed away. 3 years after that, his father followed her into the grave. Essentially, Mujin became the cursed son who buried his parents and bankrupted the legacy. His reputation was gutted, and his siblings were left in tatters. The estate is now just a pile of bills, 2 servants, and a few instructors. He still has a younger brother, Hua Dujin, and a little sister, Hua So-yun, relying on him. Mujin finally grasps why So-yun views him as the catalyst for their family's tragedy. That night, Mujin scours the journals left behind by the body's previous occupant, and a few startling truths begin to click into place. He realizes 35 years have rolled by since he brought the 9 great sects to their knees. Now, he's trapped in the skin of a madman with a shattered internal energy core. Since he has no regrets about his past life, he vows to embrace his new identity as Mujin and protect those abandoned children with everything he has. However, the Manhwa merchant group is a massive obstacle. They broke this body and fed on the clan's remains. His top priority is preparing for the inevitable clash with Du Bo next month. With a physique this fragile, he accepts that he must grind from the very bottom. He crosses his legs to meditate, beginning his journey again like a complete novice. He recalls that in his former life, his initial cultivation was a brutal, agonizing ordeal. Yet, progress with this new frame is incredibly fluid thanks to Mujin's hidden, God-tier martial foundation. He channels the raw energy surging within and pushes it to the absolute breaking point, igniting a brilliant golden radiance that floods the entire chamber. Instantly, Sak and the staff hear his guttural roars and the sounds of a violent struggle. Bursting through the doors, they find him collapsed and trembling on the floorboards. One servant cracks a joke that the young master has finally kicked the bucket. He checks Mujin's pulse and is stunned to find a heartbeat stronger than a war drum. Suddenly, Mujin's hand shoots out and grips him like a vice, demanding to know why his body feels like it's being ripped apart just by gathering energy. The servant is baffled, but Mujin presses him. He needs to know if this body holds a hidden secret. The truth is revealed. He possesses the heavenly martial body, a legendary physique blessed by the heavens themselves. Another spasm of pain hits, and Mujin realizes this holy constitution is violently rejecting his demonic arts. A body brimming with righteous energy suffers hellish torment when forced to house dark power. Mujin screams, cursing his luck for this blessing. He realizes he's in a tight spot since the duel is only 30 days away. Writhing in discomfort, he asks Sak about the two men who burst in earlier. Sak identifies the man in blue as Chief Ryu Baek-san and the one in red as Elder Jiwon-bon. The name Jae triggers a faint memory from his past life, but the agony is too sharp and he slips into unconsciousness. 3 days later, Mujin finally hauls himself up. Though Sak is terrified, he's pushing too hard. Mujin declares he's done rotting in bed with a high-stakes match looming on the horizon. He barks at Sak to go out and secure a proper sword for him immediately. Sak nearly laughs because the family can barely afford a meal, yet Mujin wants high-end steel. Mujin is forced to check the empty coffers. Sak admits they're taking loans from the Ice Tiger Gang, a dark sect whose predatory interest has buried them alive. Mujin realizes that to save the Wa clan, he has to solve the financial crisis before anything else. Still, Mujin figures borrowing a bit more won't hurt since they're already drowning anyway. Sak is a nervous wreck, fearing they're walking into a trap. Mujin tells him to pipe down and send word to the elders because he's heading out for some fresh air. When the elders receive the message, they lose their minds with worry because Mujin has walked straight into the Ice Tiger Gang's lair. Moments later, Mujin and Sak stand before the imposing gates of the criminal syndicate. Mujin tells the massive sentry to inform his superior that he's here for a chat. The guard, Kong No Ho, is a brute. He tells Mujin to just head to the gambling dens if he's looking to lose money. Mujin demands an audience with the boss, which starts to boil Kang's blood. Sak panics, telling Kong to ignore the crazy talk. The standoff grows lethal until Vice Leader Ma Jumbo steps out from the shadows, demanding to know what clown is causing a scene at their front door. Kong snorts and reports that Mujin is insisting on a meeting with their supreme leader. Ma asks for his business, and Mujin bluntly states he's here to borrow a massive pile of gold. Ma scoffs, telling Mujin he doesn't need the big boss's permission to sign away his life for a loan. And with a sinister grin, he ushers them inside. Mujin and Sak are led deep into the estate, crossing a bridge lined with cold-eyed assassins. Sak whispers that it's not too late to run, but Mujin shuts him down, saying they've already crossed the point of no return. Sak mentions a witness who once saw the sect leader in action. He's a monster who ends fights in a heartbeat. Rumor has it the leader possesses a single-strike technique that never fails. Mujin asks why Sak is telling him this now, but Ma interrupts, noting that Sak has a sharp eye for danger, because the boy realizes exactly how much trouble they are in. However, the trap has already snapped shut. They are deep in the tiger's maw, and suddenly, a circle of drawn steel surrounds them both. Mujin looks bored. He asks Ma if this ambush was the plan all along. Ma laughs, confirming he lured Mujin in because he couldn't get away with murder in the public streets. He doesn't intend to be gentle like they were with Mujin's parents. Sak is too terrified to breathe. The servant drops to his knees, begging the thugs to spare the young master's life. On the contrary, Mujin's temper flares when Ma mentions parents, since he hasn't had any in decades. Until he remembers he's technically playing a role in this new body. The stage is set. Ma signals his goons to give Mujin a brutal lesson in respect. One thug lunges forward, putting his full weight behind a heavy punch. Sak faints dead away as the fist whistles toward Mujin's skull. To everyone's shock, Mujin catches the punch with casual ease. He shatters the man's bones with a simple twist. The thug howls in agony and hits the deck. The man screams that Mujin used some sorcery. Mujin mocks him, saying his skeleton is too brittle for his ego. Mujin realizes he has to fight smart since he can't rely on his missing internal power. Ma is enraged by the incompetence. He barks for his men to kill Mujin immediately. A swordsman strikes with a lethal slash, but Mujin flows around the blade like water, realizing he must stay in constant motion. Since he can't win a contest of raw strength, he exploits his body's newfound agility. He slips under a guard and delivers a thunderous headbutt that collapses the man's face. The attacker falls back bleeding while his comrades swarm in to fill the gap, desperately trying to pin Mujin down with cold steel. But he's a ghost. He evades a low sweep and counters instantly. Mujin leaps into the air and delivers a devastating kick to the neck. The swordsman is out before he even hits the pavement. Before the gang can even blink, their elite guard are being tossed around like ragdolls. Moments later, the entire squad is groveling on the floor in pain. Sak wakes up screaming, checking if Mujin is dead, but Mujin just calls him a fool and tells him to stand up. Sak is catatonic, stammering about where Mujin learned to fight like a god. Mujin lies, saying he just learned some tricks at the market. Sak is baffled, knowing Mujin never even left the house. Ma offered some backhanded praise for his ability to crush the grunts, but he immediately flicked a coin at Mujin with the force of a bullet. It whistled past Mujin's skull by a hair. The sheer shockwave gave him a sudden, cold jolt. Ma barked a furious command for his lackeys to clear out so he could break Mujin personally. Mujin was annoyed to find such a brick wall when he only wanted to chat. Ma snapped back that a scrub like him wasn't worth the boss's time. Ma unsheathed his blade in a rage and lunged at Mujin, determined to end him. The air stilled as an impossible turn of events unfolded. Mujin caught the lethal blow. Using nothing but a pair of wooden chopsticks, Ma was absolutely floored by the sight. Little did he know, Mujin only used them because he was too broke to afford real steel. The two continued to trade a flurry of violent strikes. But Mujin held his position effortlessly, relying on his god-tier combat instincts. Before Ma could even process the movement, a chopstick had buried itself in his hand. Ma couldn't fathom how Mujin found a gap in his perfect defense, while Ma panicked. Mujin actually looked like he was having the time of his life, and warned Ma he'd pay a heavy price for underestimating simple dining utensils. Soon, Ma was reduced to a pathetic, defensive mess against the wooden sticks. He was beyond stunned, having assumed Mujin was just a weakling with no internal power. Ma wondered how anyone could become this terrifyingly strong so fast. He refused to believe it was the same man. Mujin kept poking holes in Ma's defense and his ego with the chopsticks, viciously mocking his skills for being so amateur and slow. Ma refused to be humiliated by kitchenware and launched himself into the air, betting everything on a forbidden secret technique to wipe Mujin out. He looked like a demon descending from above, but Mujin didn't even blink. He sidestepped the strike with casual grace, leaving Ma completely exposed to a counter. Ma's mind raced, wondering where this hidden, overwhelming power had been hiding. Mujin buried a massive fist into him, shattering what was left of Ma's pride as pure terror set in. Mujin coolly repeated that he was just there to secure a small loan. But this time, his eyes radiated a murderous aura that froze the room. After being beaten to a pulp, Ma finally sat down to talk sense with Mujin. The guards were forced to bow in respect while Ma spoke. Ma then asked what Mujin was really after. Mujin grilled Ma on why a gang would lend his family gold without collateral, sensing a dirty trap. Ma tried to play it off as a misunderstanding, but Mujin didn't buy the lie for a second. Mujin gave him one last warning to speak the truth or face a permanent punishment, seeing death in Mujin's eyes. Ma confessed they were acting as puppets for the Yunhua merchant group. Mujin wasn't shocked at all. He demanded to know the exact nature of the deal they had with those merchants. Ma hesitated, but Mujin reminded him that if he died protecting a rich man's secrets, he'd be forgotten in a day. Ma took the hint and revealed the merchants ordered them to drown the Hua clan in debt with predatory rates. Once the family collapsed, the Ice Tiger gang would seize the Hua lands. Mujin finally saw the land was the target. Mujin asked how much 300 gold would balloon to in a year. Ma admitted it would hit 5,000 gold. Mujin was sickened. But he didn't actually flinch and accepted the terms anyway. With a piercing gaze, he asked Ma who else was helping them sweep the dirt under the rug. Ma named the Sosan sect of the Four Great Martial Heavens. Sok gasped, noting they were a dangerous new evil alliance. Mujin's face soured at the name, Four Great Martial Heavens, and he spat out a curse. Sok feared the madness was back since Mujin had no reason to know them, but Mujin told him to drop it. Mujin grew tired of the talking and barked for the man who went to fetch the gold. The lackey quickly returned, lugging a heavy chest filled with 300 gold coins. Mujin's eyes sparked with genuine delight at the sight of the treasure, and he decided that was a fair start for his plans. He ordered Sok to pack up, but Sok was still terrified of the debt. Mujin told him to shut up and grab the loot. Ma and his bruised guards escorted Mujin to the exit like he was royalty. Mujin told them to keep the books ready, promising to clear the debt after he crushed the Yunhua group. Furthermore, Mujin issued a stern warning against bullying the local townspeople, vowing that if Ma stepped out of line, the punishment would be far worse next time. Ma bowed, but inwardly he was seething, desperate to see Mujin get humiliated later. A short while later, Sok and Mujin arrived back at the estate. They were met by the panicked elders, who saw blood on Mujin's robes. He calmly told them it wasn't his. When they asked about the gang, he casually mentioned he just wanted to pick up some spending money. Mujin declared the clan needed capital to keep their remaining men from jumping ship. The elders suspected he had just robbed the place. Mujin assured them it was all official and in the books. Then Mujin instructed the elders to focus on one thing, making sure his siblings were well fed and warm. Having settled the matter, he simply gave him a nod and walked away. Afterward, Mujin paid a visit to the family's ancestral shrine. But since he was an orphan in his previous life, He found himself at a total loss for words. He finally spoke, reporting the money was handled and vowing to protect the family. He told them to rest easy. He also promised them he'd give Du Bo a legendary thrashing for thinking he could challenge a god. He didn't realize So Yun and Du Jin were watching from the shadows, looking at him with newfound awe. Later, Mu Jin placed an order for 3 customized swords weighing 50 kilograms, 80 kilograms, and a massive 110 kilograms respectively. The servant delivered the blades, nearly snapping his spine in the process, but Mu Jin was simply thrilled that his training tools had finally arrived. Sok almost yelled, wondering what on earth he'd do with such ridiculously heavy weapons. Mu Jin just laughed, saying he was going to do what any swordsman does, swing them, obviously. Mu Jin reached for the light 50 kilograms sword with excitement, intending to use it as his starting point. However, his grin vanished when the blade didn't even budge from the floor. He cursed under his breath, realizing this body was even more pathetic than he thought. But he wasn't about to fold. He found he could move it slightly if he used every ounce of strength in both hands. Mu Jin saw Sok's exhausted face and told him to go cook a feast, emphasizing that he needed plenty of meat. Sok scurried off, feeling both drained and deeply worried for his master's sanity. Mu Jin sat by the steel, feeling the heat. He had exactly 14 days to transform himself before the duel. The heavenly martial body was the opposite of his old demonic arts. He realized the only way was to use the peerless 9 swords. He gritted his teeth and began swinging the massive blade right there in the hall. Meanwhile, Du Bo got word that Mu Jin had hospitalized the Tiger Gang so badly they were bedridden for weeks. Du Bo was shocked. He knew Mu Jin had no internal energy to pull off such a feat. Du Bo wore a wicked smile, already plotting a dirty scheme for the upcoming fight. He was actually getting hyped to see what kind of trick Mu Jin was hiding. Later, Mu Jin pushed his training into a brutal, hardcore regime. He realized he could break his limits precisely because his physique was a gift from the heavens. Throughout the grind, Sok was always there with the supplies and support he needed. He felt that with this foundation, he was finally ready to start the real work. He hoisted the 50 kilograms sword and began the forms, echoing the wisdom of his old master. After mastering the first stance, Mu Jin didn't pause for a second and transitioned immediately into the second form. He recalled his master's promise that no weapon on earth could stop his blade. As the hours blurred, his muscles began to scream from the overexertion. But he pushed through the agony. Before long, he was handling the heavy steel as if it were a wooden toy. He was even leaping across the room, the massive weight no longer slowing him down. Shortly after, he began the third form, focusing his energy to reach the peak of his power. To sharpen his instincts, he rigged several obstacles to mimic a chaotic brawl. First, he dodged a swinging heavy sphere for a while before getting clocked from behind. Next, he stood before rows of jagged, thorny bamboo. By executing the fourth form of his sword style, he shredded the entire thicket into splinters. On the surface, his blade work appeared deceptively basic. In reality, it was lethally precise, capable of severing nearly any defense. Even with total focus, he couldn't quite time the fourth form to intercept the flying logs. This forced him to escalate his technique to the fifth form. This time, he pulverized everything with a devastating fifth form slash. Feeling the raw power of his blade, he was certain nothing could stand in his way. Being outnumbered meant nothing to a man who could cleave through the wind. After the logs, he faced tiny candles hidden in bamboo tubes, turning to the sixth form for precision. He swung with such velocity that the air pressure extinguished every flame at once, passing this test. He knew he had to head outdoors to let the massive seventh form loose. With its sheer scale, he conquered the yard. Soon, he reached the ninth form, driven by the belief that his edge could split the world itself. Finally reaching the peak of the style, Mu Jin collapsed onto the dirt in a state of pure exhaustion and relief. Yet, he felt a sting of bitterness that he couldn't yet manifest the ultimate form from his previous life. He thought back to his master's lessons from his youth, which he'd largely brushed off at the time. He'd assumed his master's old friend was just telling tall tales about a sword that could cut through reality. His master confessed it sounded like a myth, but he didn't want the art to go extinct just because he wasn't a fit. He begged Mu Jin to carry the torch. His master revealed that late friend was the only warrior who could match him blow for blow. Even wilder, the man possessed zero internal energy. Master suspected the man used physical body techniques. Since the sect couldn't grasp it, the friend taught the master, hoping he'd find a worthy heir. Hearing the story, Mu Jin had roared with laughter, making fun of the powerless martial art. His master responded with a forehead flick so powerful it nearly rattled his teeth loose. He ordered Mu Jin to follow his lead without question, and Mujin had no choice but to obey the old man's whim. Master told him 1,000 reps would change his body, 100,000 reps would breathe energy into the steel itself. Ultimately, 1,000,000 swings would make him an invincible god among even the elite grandmasters. Mujin was floored, calculating it would take 3 years at 1,000 swings a day. He asked if the friend was truly that strong, and Master said if they fought for real, one would surely die. That revelation sparked a deep curiosity in Mujin regarding his master's mysterious rival. Mujin finally snapped back to reality after Sok repeatedly slapped his cheeks. He realized his journey was only beginning. Fainting after just one round meant he was still light years away from his 1,000 rep goal. Since it was late, he needed fuel, but when he glanced at his dinner, he saw nothing but pork. Disappointed, he looked at Sok and gave him a piece of his mind. He demanded beef for the next meal, insisting it was the only way to build a warrior's physique. He told Sok to burn through the Tiger Gang's money since he could just squeeze them for more. He planned to feast on beef until the day he crushed Dubo. Sok asked when he'd actually learn to fight, since the old Mujin was basically a walking vegetable. Since his siblings already knew something was up, Mujin figured he might as well let Sok in on the secret. Mujin confessed he wasn't the original owner of the body, but rather the legendary heavenly demon. Sok just laughed it off, thinking Mujin was babbling more crazy nonsense from a storybook. Sok admitted he was just terrified Mujin would lose his mind again and wander off forever. Mujin grabbed him and swore he wouldn't leave until the clan was the strongest in all of Sichuan. Besides, he had nowhere else to go. Sok teased him for talking big, which earned him a sharp, painful flick to the brow. After their talk, Mujin dismissed Sok, and the assistant scurried away. Meanwhile, the two elders were secretly plotting to help the children flee before the duel began. They were convinced Du Bo would kill Mujin, leaving the Hua family wide open for slaughter. Days passed, and Mujin was training like an absolute demon. He reached a point where he could wield a 70-kilogram slab of steel with just one hand. However, his form was still unpolished, and the deadline for the duel was just 1 week away. He was drenched in sweat and gasping for air in the training hall when the younger siblings peeked in to see how he was doing. Mujin told them to keep back for their safety. The kids said they were just scared because he hadn't stopped for days. So-yeon worried he was overworking himself because of her harsh words, but she confessed she was just bitter and didn't mean it. Looking at the two children, our hero was reminded of the siblings he loved and lost. In his previous life, he reached out and gently patted their heads, promising them that everything was under control. The two kids started copycatting his moves, giggling about how cool his fighting stance looked. They bickered over who had the better form, which took Mujin back to his own brutal training days and the crushing weight of his master's expectations. Suddenly, he had a breakthrough. The secret soul of the Peerless Nine Swords was the breathing rhythm. Armed with this epiphany, Mujin told the kids victory was guaranteed and sent them off to bed so he could focus. The children were still uneasy, but they chose to believe in their big brother. Once the room was silent, Mujin synchronized his breath and swung the blade with explosive power. On mastering the rhythm, he could finally channel all his latent physical energy into a single point. Soon, he mastered the body motion flow, a rare qigong that generates internal power through physical movement rather than meditation. Usually, this was seen as peasant martial arts, which is why most masters ignored it. With his new breathing, the massive sword felt light as a feather in his grip. He unleashed a strike that clean-cut through a solid stone statue. Meanwhile, Elder Jaewon Bong was questioning Sok about Mujin's bizarre transformation. Sok tried to claim the Wudong therapy had finally kicked in and healed the young master. But Elder Jae was far too sharp to fall for a simple story. He ordered Sok to report every single strange detail back to him immediately. Sok went to find Mujin for dinner, only to find the training hall looking like a war zone. The place was a wreck. Sok nervously announced that the food was ready. But Mujin just grunted, complaining that the room was too cramped for a real warrior's practice. He announced he was taking over the main martial arts hall for his sessions. Mujin entered the grand hall to find other disciples training, and every eye was fixed on him in judgment. Sok tried to clear the room, telling the others the young master required solitude for his workout. He told them to go find another place to swing their sticks. But the martial artist sneered, wondering why they should take orders from a mental patient. They mocked him, thinking a sword in a weakling's hand was just a prop. Mujin felt the disrespect thickening in the air and decided to address it head-on. The disciples were ready to brawl, but Captain Jinboing ordered his men to stand down and let the young master have his space. Jin was certain that Mujin had simply relapsed into his delusions again. Mujin stopped him right there, telling Jin to grow a spine and say what he was thinking to his face. Jin turned, and Mujin threw down the gauntlet, challenging him to a spar. A true test of strength between two men of the blade. Jin refused, claiming he couldn't hit the future leader of the clan. Mujin called him a spineless coward, saying he knew Jin didn't have the stones to back up his arrogance. That insult did the trick. Jin drew his steel, ready to humble Mujin. The duel ignited instantly, and Mujin shocked everyone by stabbing his own sword into the floor and charging Jin barehanded. In a flash of speed, he lunged inside Jin's guard and shoved his head before the captain could even blink. The onlookers were baffled. Nobody had ever seen a sword duel where one guy didn't use a sword. Mujin kept toyed with Jin, dancing around him with blurring speed while Jin flailed to keep up. Jin finally snapped, screaming at Mujin to fight like a man instead of a ghost. Mujin grinned and finally grabbed his blade, ready to show him the true meaning of power. But Jin didn't hold back, spouting nonsense about how Mujin was the sole reason the clan had fallen into ruin. Since Mujin was the root of all their misery, Jin felt he didn't deserve to even graze the path of martial arts. Jin hurled himself at Mujin in a blind rage. But Mujin halted his momentum instantly, employing the ninth form of the peerless swordsmanship, violently rattling his opponent's internal energy down to his very soul. Mujin refused to give Jin a single moment to recover. As he connected with a bone-shattering punch directly to his jaw, Jin was blasted across the arena, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. While Mujin made it crystal clear that the old status quo was officially dead. As he ate the dirt, Jin finally swallowed the jagged truth. Mujin had become a completely different animal. He could feel a fierce, unwavering resolve bleeding from Mujin's pores, unlike anything he'd ever felt. Seeing Jin hit the canvas sent shockwaves through Sok and the other disciples spectating the bout. The warriors scrambled to help their captain, who was sprawled out in a total blackout. Mujin stood tall with the aura of a champion, asking if anyone still doubted his win. One of the fighters shrieked at him, barking that he must have used some pathetic, underhanded deception to win. Jin clawed his way back to his feet and snarled at the man to zip it, openly admitting he had been bested. Jin bowed in genuine respect, confessing that he had actually found enlightenment through their clash. Mujin accepted the gesture with a nod and told him to clear out. As the disciples filed out of the hall, Mujin signaled for Sok to follow them, because he desperately needed a moment of silence to think. The bitter fighter kept grumbling, convinced Jin had thrown the fight, but Jin shut him down fast, explaining that he had actually gone in with the full intent to break Mujin's spirit. The guy was skeptical, but Jin looked him in the eye and told him he was dead serious. Jin admitted he didn't have all the answers, but it was undeniable their young master had undergone a massive awakening. Sok, meanwhile, was scratching his head, wondering when exactly Mujin had transformed so radically. Yet at the same time, he was profoundly relieved that the change had actually stuck. That evening, the two elders convened a secret meeting regarding the looming duel. Both veterans had served the clan for over 36 years, their loyalty never wavering through the storms. They reminisced about the Fire Emperor's legendary glory days. He was a prodigy whose martial prowess was so elite that even the arrogant Tangmen had to tip their hats to him. In short, the elders were enchanted by his strength, and both had pledged their lives to his cause. Du feared they were on the verge of betraying that bond, but Du firmly disagreed, arguing they simply needed to resolve the succession crisis. Du noted they had coddled Mujin for 17 years while the clan's prestige evaporated. The pair felt they had fulfilled their duty, believing the Fire Emperor wouldn't hold a grudge against them in the afterlife. Basically, they had pooled their savings to start fresh elsewhere, with a few loyal swordsmen ready to escort them. Du then urged Du to lead the way while he stayed behind to keep a final watch over Mujin. It came to light that the sect leader of the Kongtong sect, on the payroll of the Yunghua merchants, would referee the bout. Du was stunned by the news, as every sign pointed to the match being a total setup. That merchant guild was essentially a pack of vultures intent on picking the Hua family's bones clean. Du told Du to gather the children and wait at the fallback point, knowing the news would be a hammer blow to them. Later, Mujin noticed his beef rations were getting suspiciously thin and grilled Sok for the reason. Sok confessed that the chief manager was being incredibly stingy with the household funds. And although it ticked Mujin off, he decided to let it slide for now, choosing instead to flaunt his sharp new threads for Sok. Sok instantly killed the vibe, deadpanning that he looked far more intimidating when he was wrapped in bloody bandages. When the hour finally arrived to head out for the high-stakes duel, Mujin crossed paths with Du just outside the estate. Initially, Mujin assumed the elder was there to block his path, but the old man shook his head, revealing he actually intended to stand by his side at the arena. Mujin saw that Du was basically a bundle of nerves, while his own plan was simple. He was going to turn his opponent into a human punching bag. And so, Sok and Du followed Mujin to the battlefield. At the venue, the atmosphere was electric, with a mob hungry for a spectacle. And of course, the vultures who only showed up to gamble on the blood. Since the odds against Mujin were astronomical, the smart money was piling up on his rival. A moment later, he strolled into the ring casually sucking on a lollipop. Those watching dismissed him as a joke, some even frantic to pull their bets before the slaughter. As he stepped onto the sands, he was confronted by Choi Sian. She asked with a sneer if he really intended to throw his life away in this match. The crowd caught wind of this and mocked Mujin for initiating a fight he couldn't win, assuming he'd finally lost his marbles. Mujin was seething internally, realizing the merchants had framed them as the aggressors, and he vowed to make them pay. Mujin boldly told Choi Sian he wouldn't roll over while she tried to loot his family's heritage. That was the sole reason for this fight. The spectators were stunned by the accusation, not expecting a merchant group to be hunting for martial secrets. Choi Sian remained smugly confident, certain that Mujin would regret his hollow bravado soon enough. The fuse was finally lit, and the stage was set for war. The announcer introduced the official witness, Han Ji-gang of the Kongtong sect. Han loomed on the balcony, exuding an aura of cold authority, ready to carry out his master's hidden agenda. He commanded Du Bo and Mujin to engage in a fair duel before the eyes of the public. Suddenly, Du Bo dropped a psychological bomb, claiming that the very uniform Mujin was wearing was a charity gift to mark his pathetic return. Mujin just grinned, unsheathing his massive greatsword and telling Du Bo he'd be taking back the rest of his dignity after the win. The crowd gasped at the sight. They had never seen anyone bring such a colossal slab of steel to a duel. Furthermore, everyone remembered the Fire Emperor for his lethal bare-handed strikes. Even Du was floored, leaning over to ask Sok if Mujin had mentioned this insanity. Essentially, both had spent the morning trying to convince Mujin to run, believing he was walking to his execution. However, Sok was starting to feel a flicker of hope, though Du's optimism was still buried in the dirt. Once both warriors took their stances, the signal was given and the chaos erupted. Boiling with intent, Mujin lunged at Du Bo immediately, swinging the heavy blade with a roar. He channeled a strike of absolute, unbridled destruction. Du Bo evaded by a hair's breadth, but the ground imploded wherever the sword made contact. The audience was left speechless. Nobody expected Mujin to be this fast or this terrifyingly powerful. The rumor was that Mujin was a talentless hack, yet here he was hunting like an apex predator. Even Du Bo was visibly shaken, having anticipated a total walkover. Mujin refused to let up, keeping the heat on Du Bo with relentless aggression. He hammered away at Du Bo's defense, but the rival managed to catch a strike on his own blade. The two warriors locked eyes in a tense stalemate. The collision sent a thunderous crack through the air, a magnificent display of raw power for all to see. Choi Sian was visibly rattled to see Mujin actually trading blows and holding his ground. Still, she convinced herself that no amount of training could bridge the gap between him and Du Bo. Mujin continued his assault with the greatsword, but Du Bo danced away, relying on his superior speed. As the battle intensified, Du Bo managed to slip through and land a heavy counter. Mujin was forced back, and Du Bo hissed a vow to make Mujin's existence a living nightmare. Far worse than the first time he broke him. He was smugly certain he possessed the cruelty required to shatter any man's soul. Watching from above, Du admitted he was shocked at Mujin's grit. Sok then whispered that from what he'd seen, Mujin hadn't even revealed his trump card yet. Du thought Sok was just being a hype man, but Sok insisted he'd seen the demon in Mujin's solo training and promised a storm was coming. As the blades clashed, Mujin realized his raw power was now dead, even with Du Bo's. It made him wonder if his training had been even more effective than he imagined. Regardless, he wasn't sweating the details. No matter the odds, he was there to seize the ultimate victory. And this time he fully intended to end Du Bo's life. Meanwhile, Du was whisking Mujin's siblings away to a secure location. He arrived at the hideout while the children were still fast asleep. He recalled Du explaining that the only reason he stayed behind was to sweep up the mess. Specifically, whatever remained of Mujin once Du Bo was finished with him. Though Du questioned if their desertion was honorable, the wheels were already in motion. Back at the arena, the two combatants continued to clash with ferocity. Mujin remained unfazed, viewing Du Bo as nothing more than a common amateur compared to his own prowess. The two continued to exchange blows, and while it looked like a stalemate to the untrained eye, the keenest observers could see Mujin was actually dictating the pace. Spectators began mocking Mujin, claiming his skills weren't nearly as legendary as rumored. At that exact moment, Du Bo unleashed a devastating strike aimed directly at Mujin's vitals. Du and Sok nearly collapsed from the tension, praying silently for Mujin to evade the lethal blow. Sensing the killing intent, Mujin invoked the first form of the Peerless Nine Swords. Du Bo's attack connected. But thanks to Mujin's perfect technique, he parried it effortlessly, leaving the audience speechless. Even Du Bo was visibly shaken and was forced to retreat several paces. Realizing Mujin had entered a state of absolute combat dominance, Du Bo began gathering every spark of internal energy for a final, desperate technique. However, Mujin scoffed, telling him his energy circulation was pathetically sluggish. Mujin then signaled the activation of the second form of his lethal swordsmanship, lunging toward Du Bo with a cold and terrifying murderous intent. Du Bo felt the overwhelming pressure and could only struggle to survive the onslaught. He was spiraling into confusion, unable to grasp how he was being dismantled by Mujin. Du Bo funneled his entire being into a desperate block against Mujin's descending blade. But in a heartbeat, his own sword shattered into 1,000 shards before his eyes. Mujin's blade followed through, delivering a brutal, decisive slash across Du Bo. Du Bo was sent sprawling into the dirt, while Choi Sian let out a piercing scream of despair, wailing Du Bo's name in horror. Du Bo lay broken in a crimson pool, his right arm completely severed from his body. And with that, Mujin stood as the undisputed victor of the duel. Mujin calmly approached the severed limb, declaring a partial payment for a 17-year-old debt. Choi Sian was paralyzed with shock, and Mujin dryly remarked that the merchant group better hurry if they hoped to stitch him back together. Han leaped from a balcony to check Du Bo's vitals. Choi Sian scrambled to his side as well. Han's face went pale as he realized Du Bo's internal energy center had been completely pulverized. Han glared up at Mujin, asking if such cruelty was necessary. Mujin just tilted his head, playing the fool. Han argued the skill gap made the maiming unnecessary. Mujin shot back that since Han loved to lecture, he had a few choice words of his own. Mujin asked if it was necessary to use the 7 injuries fist on a helpless 5-year-old years ago. With eyes burning like embers, Mujin told Han this was simply the settlement of a nearly 2-decade-long grudge. Mujin added that the bill for the Wa clan's suffering was finally due. With icy intent, he warned Han to prepare for what was coming. Choi Sian collapsed in a heap of agony, vowing through her tears that she would never forget this humiliation. As Mujin exited the stage, the crowd erupted in cheers, mesmerized by how he had systematically crushed Du Bo. Beyond the stunning blade work, they marveled at a style they had never seen. They knew a new martial legend had been born. Du and Sok scrambled through the crowd to greet their champion, and he simply told them it was time to return home to their own territory. As they walked, he abruptly stopped to ask Du if he had squandered the gold he'd been given. Du stuttered a reply, admitting there was a small amount remaining in the coffers. Mujin then mentioned he'd likely be paying another visit to the Ice Tiger Gang for a fresh infusion of cash. Suddenly, he looked Du in the eye and said he didn't care if Du and the others wanted to desert the clan, but he made it clear there would be hell to pay if they ever tried to take his siblings away again. The murderous aura he released was so heavy that Du's knees nearly buckled on the spot. Meanwhile, the siblings were berating Du for dragging them away when they should have been cheering for their brother. Du realized he had made a grave mistake when the messenger pigeon arrived, confirming Mujin's impossible victory. Du's letter warned that their plot was exposed. Du raced back in a panic while the kids cheered, desperate to see their hero. Later, Mujin informed Du that he was heading out to negotiate with the Ice Tiger Gang again. He told Du to relax, even though Mujin was now a proven warrior. Du pleaded with him to avoid the Sosan sect at all costs, fearing their reach. Realizing the old man was paralyzed by fear, Mujin gave him a hollow promise to stay out of trouble. With that, Mujin set out for the gang's headquarters, while Sok followed, fearing a bloodbath. Mujin insisted there was no more time for delays and told Sok to stay close if he wanted to live. Shortly after, Mujin walked into the Ice Tiger Gang's lair, leaving Ma completely frozen in shock. Because he had been certain Mujin would never leave that arena alive, Mujin coolly told Ma he had arrived to settle his accounts. While mockingly noting that the gang's headquarters looked like a ghost town, Ma tried to save face, claiming the local gamblers had only left to witness the historic match against Du Bo. Since the gang claimed to be fans, Mujin asked if they had run a betting pool on his life. Mujin was certain the odds against him were massive, meaning the gang must have made a fortune on his win. Since they profited so much, Mujin won his cut, and Ma knew he was about to be bled dry. Hoping to prevent a massacre, Ma promised they would show him proper gratitude. Mujin was pleased. After all, even a demon god appreciates a healthy profit. Ma felt the temperature drop as Mujin's killing intent flared. Mujin then demanded to see the big boss. This sent Ma into a cold sweat, and he stammered, asking why Mujin was so interested in the leader. Mujin slammed his palm onto the table, growling that he wouldn't ask a third time. Just as Mujin was about to lose his patience, the sect leader, Che Guangyu, emerged from the shadows. Mujin was taken aback, straight up insulting the man by saying he had an exceptionally hideous face. Che acknowledged his men's reports, but Mujin didn't let up, mocking his appearance and his cowardice for hiding. Mujin noticed a shadow looming behind the leader and asked if that was just another servant. No, the aura coming from that man was thick with the scent of a professional killer. He was the Black Fang Death of the Sosan sect. The assassin snarled at Mujin for being greedy, despite being warned to stay away. Mujin simply told the man to shut his mouth if he valued his heartbeat. Black Fang erupted in a rage and lunged at Mujin, a move that sent Sok into a state of pure terror. Mujin didn't feel a hint of fear. He was a force of nature ready to mow down anything in his path. Mujin casually flicked a chopstick toward the charging assassin. The wood struck with the force of an arrow, pinning Black Fang's hand to the wall. Only then did the killer realize Mujin was a monster and that he needed to fight for his life. Mujin told Black Fang that praise from a piece of garbage like him was offensive. This pushed the assassin over the edge, and he charged again with blinding speed. This time Mujin met the challenge head-on, lunging forward with a grin. But he vanished into thin air, reappearing behind the killer. Black Fang spun around in a panic. But Mujin dodged his desperate strikes with a bored expression. He was clearly just playing with his food, Black Fang couldn't wrap his head around how a mere youth could outclass him so completely. Mujin decided to end the game. He drove a chopstick deep into Black Fang's left eye. The assassin's scream was blood-curdling, sending shivers down the spines of the onlookers. Black Fang collapsed, howling curses and promising that the Sosan sect would hunt Mujin to the ends of the earth for this transgression. Mujin found the threat amusing. He kicked the man in the skull and told him to go ahead and call for backup. However, he reminded Black Fang that the Sosan sect wouldn't arrive in time to save his soul. Suddenly, Black Fang's bravado broke. He began to beg, offering anything to keep his life. Mujin was almost disappointed by how quickly he folded, but since assets were on the table, he spared him, for now. Black Fang claimed his fortune was stashed in Daqing, but he swore to fetch every coin. Mujin took the deal but warned the man he was as good as dead if he didn't return with the loot. Shivering with dread, the assassin bolted, promising to be back in a flash. Having dismissed Black Fang, he fixated on Che, who was currently trembling like a leaf, and announced it was officially time to settle their accounts. Che instantly collapsed to the floor, sobbing for mercy and offering to surrender his entire estate. Mujin smirked, informing Che that he had nothing left to bargain with since his possessions already belonged to Mujin. Che was floored. Mujin commanded him to calculate every bit of profit stolen from the poor and every life he destroyed as blood money. With tears streaming down his face, Che pledged his everything to Mujin, but this only fueled Mujin's fury. He crushed Che's skull against the floor, reminding the coward that he couldn't gift away what Mujin had already seized. A heavy, suffocating fear paralyzed the onlookers. Mujin turned his gaze and asked for the next in line. Ma scrambled forward, identifying himself as the vice leader, and dropped to his knees to plead for grace. He gave his word to walk the straight and narrow if he was granted a single second chance. Seeing the sincerity in his desperation, Mujin decided to let the man live. So Yun questioned Ma on the value of Che's hoard. Ma began tallying it up, starting with the manor, estimating the total at 4,000 gold taels. The Ice Tiger Gang's collective wealth sat at roughly 10,000 gold taels, plus a 500 gold tael tribute from the Sosan sect. In total, the haul exceeded a staggering 20,000 gold taels. And Mujin made it clear. He was taking every single bit of it. Ma immediately vowed to organize the tribute and deliver it personally. Mujin nodded, wanting the transaction finalized without delay. Once Ma scurried off, Mujin gave the remaining officers a chilling stare, telling them it was time to buy back their lives. This left them petrified. He reminded them that Ma was the only one with a guarantee of safety. Panic erupted as they began groveling for their souls. Sometime later, Mujin arrived back at the manor with chests overflowing with jewels and coin, leaving Du absolutely stunned. He informed Du that each trunk contained approximately 400 gold taels. Du tried to warn Mujin that the Ice Tiger Gang had the Sosan sect at their back. However, the real threat wasn't Sosan, but their ally, a nightmare named Jujugong. Jujugong added that the sect also boasted the lethal pair known as Black Fang and Blood Fang. The moment Black Fang was mentioned, Mujin casually noted he had already dismantled that guy. This revelation left Du completely floored. Mujin told Du not to confuse him with the spineless men of the past, because anyone who threatened the clan was heading straight for a coffin. With that, he barked an order for beef and demanded his siblings be fed a feast upon their return, as Mujin turned to depart. Du couldn't wrap his head around how Mujin had terrified Black Fong, a man feared as a local demon. Du realized with a shiver that Mujin had evolved into someone entirely unrecognizable from the boy he once knew. Meanwhile, Choi Sian had commissioned a team of killers to dismantle everything Mujin loved, but she specified they must take one of the two youngsters alive. Once upon a time, the Blazing Wa clan was a force to be reckoned with. Their legendary founder, the Fire Emperor, was revered by warriors everywhere. Even the elite Tang men of Sichuan spoke his name with respect. In a single generation, the Wa clan became an unstoppable martial titan that commanded the world's attention. Even grandmasters hesitated before crossing them. In those days, the citizens of Shixiang would erupt in cheers whenever a clan member appeared. However, once the Fire Emperor vanished, his successor proved to be an utterly incompetent failure. Under that weak leadership, the Wa clan's prestige withered, and their loyal followers abandoned ship one by one. The memory of the world-dominating Fire Emperor faded, lingering only in the minds of the old. Yet, the consensus remained. He was a man of peerless legend. Because of the magnetic, heavy aura Mujin projected, the elders couldn't help but see the shadow of the late Fire Emperor in him. Shortly after, a group of bloodied martial artists arrived to tell Du they had been ambushed by a pack of assassins. Old Joe was currently holding the line alone with a handful of men. Hearing this, Du realized the two children were in mortal peril. He commanded the fighters to alert Mujin immediately while he raced toward the danger himself. Deep in the woods, Joe was forced into a desperate solo stand as his comrades were cut down one by one. Despite the lethal odds, he planted his feet, ready to die to keep the children safe. Just as his defenses were about to shatter, Du burst onto the scene to reinforce him. This infuriated the assassins, who were seconds away from finishing their grim work. The moment Du stepped in, the lead assassin barked a command for his squad to slaughter both old men. And a savage, desperate skirmish reignited. Despite their experience, the weight of old age and fading strength began to take its toll. Slowly but surely, the assassin seized control of the fight. Before he could even catch his breath, Du took a deep slash to the shoulder and was forced to stumble back. One killer pinned Du down while ordering his partner to execute one of the children. He hammered away at Du, forcing him into a corner, but the old man refused to give an inch. A moment later, a jagged blade tore through Du's side, making him scream in agony. Du collapsed, powerless to protect the kids. With him down, the assassins circled the children, coldly debating which one to kill first. Though Du Jin was small and untrained, the boy stood defiantly in front of his sister. The assassins decided he would be the first to fall. Just as a blade swung toward Du Jin, Mujin's roar shook the trees, ordering them to freeze exactly where they stood. He looked like a vengeful god as he closed the distance with blurring speed, yet the killers didn't flinch. To them, the old Mujin was just a broken joke of a man. The lead assassin ordered his crew to butcher Mujin for daring to interfere. One killer charged, and Mujin used him as a lightning rod for his absolute rage. He shattered the man's blade with a single, effortless motion, before delivering a vertical strike that literally split the assassin in two. Without breaking stride, he vaulted over the remains and lunged at the rest of the killers. Witnessing his sheer ferocity, the leader screamed for his men to swarm him and strike as one. The pack closed in, but before a single blade could graze him, Mujin unleashed the fifth form of the peerless nine swords, the army-slashing fist. He tore through the group as if they were made of nothing but wet paper. A hidden attacker tried to strike from the blind spot, but Mujin ducked and claimed the man's head in a single arc. Only then did the last survivor realize they were facing a literal demon in human skin. Before he could even flinch, his right arm was hacked off. He shrieked in unbearable pain. Mujin told him to stay still if he had any desire to see tomorrow. Mujin turned to see Joe helping a bloodied Du to his feet. Nearby, Du Jin was shielding his sister's eyes to spare her from the gruesome sight. Du Jin whispered to his sister that the nightmare was over because Mujin had arrived to save them. Mujin approached the youngsters and asked if they were hurt. Du Jin promised they were okay. Mujin noted they must have been terrified out of their minds. But Du Jin declared he wasn't scared, claiming the pride of a martial arts master's son. Mujin felt a wave of relief. He ruffled the boy's hair, praising his immense courage. Then he instructed old Joe to escort the wounded men and the children back to the safety of the manor. As soon as they were out of sight, Mujin turned to the last assassin and told him to stop whining about his arm. Mujin demanded to know if the Yunhua merchant group had pulled the strings. The man hesitated. Mujin offered him a slim chance at survival in exchange for the truth. The killer's eyes lit up with desperate hope. He quickly blurted out that Choi Sian had contracted them through the Ziluan organization. After confessing everything, he begged Mujin to honor his word and let him crawl away. Mujin told him to run back and inform Choi Sian that he had butchered the entire squad she sent for his family, and to tell her that her own head would be the next trophy on his mantle. Later, every head turned to watch Mujin as he marched through the city streets, completely drenched in blood. Those who once mocked him shrank away in silence, terrified of becoming his next target. The whispers grew. Had the legendary prodigy they once worshipped truly returned? After ensuring his terrifying presence was felt by everyone on the street, Mujin finally crossed the threshold of his home. Masak rushed out to meet him, only to have Mujin casually push him aside. He asked Masak if the wounded were being treated in the infirmary, and he confirmed they were. Masak added that the siblings were resting safely in their rooms. Mujin was finally at peace. He ordered Masak to get his bath ready. Shortly after, Mujin sank into the soothing warmth of the tub prepared just for him. While soaking, his thoughts drifted toward his younger siblings. He felt a deep yearning to shield them from the world's cruelty. Despite their heritage as a warrior bloodline, Mujin hated the idea of them witnessing such carnage at such a tender age. Yet, he simultaneously fretted that he was merely projecting his own past scars onto them. The following morning at the infirmary, Mujin approached Elder Du to demand the red fire cultivation scrolls. Du was visibly rattled by the request, prompting Mujin to ask why he looked so terrified. Du questioned why he was so insistent on having the manual. Mujin saw right through him. Realizing Du feared he'd lose his mind again and go on a rampage, Du quickly tried to play it cool. Mujin bluntly stated he intended to train himself since Du was currently incapable of guiding him. He could see the doubt etched on Du's face, though the elder denied it as fast as he could. Mujin then gave his word that there was no need for alarm, as he had no intention of snapping. Sensing that Mujin lacked any sinister motives, Du finally surrendered the scrolls. Once Mujin had vanished, Du voiced his lingering anxieties to Du. He wondered if arming Mujin with a manual was a catastrophe in the making. Du told him to relax, noting that Mujin's recent blade work was nothing short of legendary. Du credited their survival against the assassins entirely to Mujin. He added that the boy seemed truly transformed, convinced the Taoist remedy was a miracle. Du conceded the treatment worked wonders, but he secretly wondered if it had also unlocked some hidden martial potential. Du also found the sudden leap in skill baffling and assumed Mujin must have stumbled upon some secret master, as no other logic fit. Du felt a surge of optimism, believing the clan's long spiral into darkness was finally over. Over at the training grounds, Mujin gathered his siblings for a session. Mujin broke down the philosophy of his training, emphasizing the need for absolute, liquid movement. He described it as a fundamental footwork style forged in the fires of real combat. Both kids were awestruck, though So-Yun hesitated. She was confused because Elder Du once claimed Mujin had never seen a real fight. Du-Jin winced, unable to believe his sister had just blabbed like that. Mujin brushed off the awkwardness and told them to cut the chatter and attack him with the basic strikes they'd been practicing. The two dropped into their stances and lunged at Mujin in unison. But the way they moved left Mujin feeling utterly let down. Their clumsy display made Mujin question if they even belonged to a lineage of warriors. He realized they lacked even the most basic mechanics to be considered actual martial artists. Disgusted by the amateurish performance, he barked at them to stop. He called an end to the session, claiming a sudden, throbbing headache. The kids were confused, as they hadn't even managed to touch him. Mujin then told a white lie, saying they were better than he thought. He told them to focus on building their endurance before trying anything fancy. After they left, Mujin realized that carrying the future of the clan on his back was going to be a grueling task. It occurred to him that his own master must have suffered just as much trying to teach him. Regardless, Mujin was determined to rebuild the clan he had once ruined. Furthermore, Mujin was driven to conquer the one rival who had remained undefeated in his previous life. Mujin then gripped his blade and began a solo training grind. He noticed that the heavy steel now felt almost weightless in his grasp. He could feel his speed sharpening with every rhythmic repetition of the forms. A few days later, Du and Du were finally back on their feet and working. Masak reported that they had successfully completed every task he'd assigned. He gave him a nod of approval, but Masak seemed to be fishing for more praise. Mujin snapped at him, reminding him of the disaster that was nearly missed. He then warned the elders they'd be finished if they ever tried such a stunt again. Both nodded in fear. They bowed low before Mujin, offering their deepest apologies for their lack of judgment. Just then, the Taoist who had supposedly cured Mujin, Du Yongsu, made his appearance. Mujin didn't have the slightest idea who the man was. He nearly insulted the guest before Ma Sak could whisper that this was the savior who had healed him. Ma Sak apologized to the old man, claiming Mujin's mind was still a bit foggy, which explained the rudeness. But Mujin gave him a swift kick for talking about him like he was a patient. Mujin decided to play the part for a moment and apologize for his memory loss. Mujin invited the guest inside, noting he must be drained after such a long trek. A few days prior, Ma Sak had raved about this Taoist, claiming he was a high-level Wudong disciple. He said the Taoist's holy energy had saved Mujin and that it had cost the clan a fortune to hire him. Back in the present, Mujin was actually looking forward to testing this guy. That was the real reason he welcomed him into the estate. Mujin then asked if he truly held the secrets of Wudong, and Yongsu nodded with a look of fake serenity. He boasted that he was the sole keeper of the Wudong sect's true essence. The moment he said that, Mujin stomped the ground and asked with deadly seriousness if he was really the Wudong White Immortal, since he knew for a fact there were no other living heirs. Yongsu tried to play it off, but Mujin gave him one shot to tell the truth before things got ugly. The Taoist doubled down on his lie, asking why Mujin would doubt the man who saved his life. Without a word, Mujin unsheathed his massive greatsword. He told Yongsu that if he were a true Taoist master, dodging a single swing would be child's play. Mujin lashed out, nearly cleaving the old man. The force of the blow left a jagged crater in the floor. Ma Sak and the elders went into a panic, convinced Mujin had relapsed into madness. Mujin barked at them to shut up and bring some water, promising to reveal a little magic. As soon as the bucket arrived, Mujin doused Yongsu from head to toe. Even soaked, Yongsu tried to maintain his dignity, demanding to know if this was how the clan treated its benefactors. Mujin ignored the whining and yanked the long white beard. It peeled right off, leaving the witnesses in a state of total shock. Yongsu knew his game was up the second his fake whiskers were exposed. Mujin mocked him, noting that he'd clearly used a lot of expensive glue to keep the facade together. Yongsu was soon cornered and forced to answer to Mujin and his crew. Ma Sak asked how they should dispose of the fraud. Mujin mused about turning him into a eunuch by removing a few essential parts. Yongsu went white as a sheet and began groveling for his life. Mujin chuckled, saying he didn't want to kill him, because a dead man can't pay back a debt. He just wanted a few limbs. But Yongsu was paralyzed with fear and begged for his body to remain whole. Yongsu promised to refund every single coin he'd stolen. Mujin agreed, but added a safety tax for keeping the man's parts intact. Fearing the worst, Yongsu agreed to any price. Mujin then asked Du about the total loss, and Du admitted he'd been swindled out of 50 gold taels. Mujin sighed at Du's unbelievable gullibility for falling for such a cheap act. In his defense, Du claimed he'd heard countless rumors about Yongsu's divine healing powers. Mujin ordered Yongsu to cough up the 50 gold taels immediately. Yongsu agreed, but claimed the stash was at his home in Jinjiang. Mujin told him to lead the way to Jinjiang, even though it was a 4-hour journey. Du offered to assist, but Mujin declined, reminding them they were still recovering from their wounds. He told them to stay put and ensure the manor remained secure while he was gone. As he departed with the scammer, Du noticed Joe's lingering nervousness. He told Joe to have a little faith in Mujin, because the boy they knew was long gone, replaced by someone formidable. A while later, they reached the spot where Yongsu's carriage was parked, and Mujin was stunned by the sheer opulence of the vehicle. It was clear that the scamming business had been incredibly lucrative. Mujin was even more impressed when he climbed inside and saw the luxury within. The walls were padded with fine cotton and draped in leather. Yongsu boasted that comfort was his top priority during his many travels. Mujin smirked, noting the scammer had a dedicated work ethic, and asked why he didn't try an honest living. Yongsu bowed, swearing he was going legit from that day forward. Mujin then stretched out for a nap, telling the old man he needed some shut-eye. He ordered to be woken upon arrival. Yongsu nodded eagerly, promising to wake him the moment they pulled in. Secretly, Yongsu was fuming, plotting a nasty surprise for the brat who dared to humiliate him. The carriage rolled out, and after several hours on the road, they pulled into a suspiciously quiet and isolated forest clearing. Yongsu scrambled out of the carriage to greet a shady associate. The man looked every bit the part of a ruthless mountain brigand. He whispered that Mujin was out cold inside. He commanded the bandit to haul Mujin out and execute him to prove they weren't to be trifled with. The brute's eyes lit up with predatory excitement. He couldn't fathom why any fool would dare sabotage a Taoist's lucrative racket. The giant lunged into the carriage and threw a heavy punch just as the strike was inches from connecting. Mujin shifted effortlessly, parrying the blow with the flat of his blade. With a dark, mocking grin, Mujin asked if they had finally reached their stop. Mujin shot a look of pure loathing at the massive figure towering over him. He blasted the brute out of the carriage with a single kick, leaving Yang-Su paralyzed with dread. The bandit felt a bone-shaking tremor surge through his limbs. He realized the rumors weren't lies. This Mujin was a top-tier monster. Mujin strolled out of the carriage, dryly asking Yang-Su since when the destination looked like a graveyard in the middle of nowhere. Mujin finally connected the dots. He was a marked man. The old fraud wasn't just a petty scammer. He was a snake with much darker ambitions. Surprisingly, Mujin wasn't even irritated. He had been looking for a reason to break a sweat anyway. Mujin ignited an overwhelming pressure from within, challenging the big man to show his worth. The bandit felt the air grow heavy. Terrified to go solo, he summoned his entire squad to swarm Mujin. 3 more giants emerged from the shadows. It turns out these were the infamous 4 demons of Zhongshan. The instant Mujin laid eyes on them, he sensed the telltale trace of demonic energy, though he kept the observation to himself. Mujin eyed their eclectic arsenal, curious to see if their power matched their frightening reputation. With a burst of speed, Mujin charged the leader, forcing him back and isolating him from the rest of the pack. He pinned the leader down with a relentless, punishing rain of strikes. The others realized their brother was being dismantled, so they scrambled to intervene. Even through his guard, the leader felt like he was being hit by a falling mountain. He compared the impact of Mujin's fists to solid bars of lead. His footing gave way instantly, and Mujin delivered a devastating kick to the face, shattering his jaw. Just then, the rest of the squad closed in. The nearest demon swung a massive axe at Mujin's head, but he ghosted past the blade. He drove a brutal elbow into the man's solar plexus, forcing a ragged scream of agony. The remaining 2 attempted to trap Mujin in a classic pincer maneuver, but he ducked out of the way, causing them both to stumble over their own momentum. This blunder left a wide-open gap, and Mujin floored one with a thunderous punch. Mujin then locked his sights on the final man standing. The bandit raised his sword in a desperate attempt to block the coming storm. But the steel snapped like a dry twig the moment Mujin's blade struck. Mujin's edge stopped a hair's breadth from splitting him in 2. The man saw his life flash before him, trembling like a leaf. Before he could breathe, Mujin sent him flying back with a crushing kick to the ribs. In the blink of an eye, Mujin had systematically neutralized all 4 of them. They were left slumped on the dirt, gasping for air and clutching their broken bodies. During the clash, he confirmed his suspicion. They were definitely practitioners of the dark arts. It puzzled him why such sinister techniques were resurfacing in the heart of the Central Plains. Mujin viewed them as wayward juniors, and he had no desire to spill the blood of his own kind. As he deliberated, the leader shrieked a total surrender, begging for his life. At this sight, Yang-Su realized his life was over because the legendary 4 demons had been crushed like insects. The leader confessed that a few moves were enough to show them that Mujin was a god among men. Mujin asked why they bothered fighting at all if they were that smart. Mujin offered to spare them, but at a price. He would shatter their energy centers and cut their meridians forever. Horrified, the leader prostrated himself, weeping and begging Mujin. He implored him not to end their lives as warriors, claiming they were just pawns following a paycheck. Mujin told him to stop the theatrics since they were already past their prime. He then demanded to know the source of their forbidden techniques. The giant looked genuinely stumped. Mujin clarified, demanding to know the name of their master. He noted that while their demonic energy was pathetic, it was real. He wanted to find the root of the rot. The leader swore on his life that they never even learned the man's name. Mujin grew agitated, find it hard to believe these fools didn't even know who taught them. The leader explained the master kept his identity a secret and forbid them from seeking other students. Mujin remarked that they should have stuck to being mediocre warriors instead of turning to a life of crime. The leader quickly corrected him, insisting they weren't bandits. He claimed they were just supporting their brother's little side hustle. Mujin was baffled, scolding them for backing a fraud like Yang-Su. Only then did the leader admit they thought the old man was a miracle healer, saving lives. Mujin decided to show mercy, ordering them to ditch Yang-Su and find a real path. He warned them of a slow death if he caught them doing evil again. The leader thanked him profusely. Then Mujin turned to Yang-Su, announcing that the bill for emotional distress had just doubled, leaving the old fraud in a state of pure terror. After the carriage pulled away, the 4 brothers had a sudden epiphany. Mujin was a leader truly worthy of their devotion. The 4 of them sprinted after the carriage and blocked its path. Mujin wondered why they were stopping again, until he climbed out to find the 4 giants kneeling, Hailing him as Big Brother, they swore eternal fealty, promising to serve him until their last breath. They begged for induction, but Mujin thought. These four had clearly suffered some severe head trauma from the fight. He tried to shoo them away, but they wailed louder, claiming he had to take responsibility for them, and revealed they were actually quite young. This stunned Mujin. He had assumed they were old men given how rugged and ugly their faces were. Mujin couldn't believe they were younger than him, and he was only 23 years old. He asked if they had some sort of energy backlash that aged them. The leader was shocked, as they assumed Mujin would see their youth instantly. Mujin added that it was bizarre for demonic cultists to join a failing righteous clan. It was a scandal waiting to happen. The eldest, John Mook, 21, explained their master taught them that the dark arts were a way of life, not a political stance. Beside him was the youngest, No Sok, a mere 18 years old. Mujin respected that philosophy, but warned that any righteous family would be ruined by the association. The second brother, Dong Ruk, 20, snarled that they would simply crush the skull of anyone who dared to gossip. The third, Dung Tai, 19, nodded in aggressive agreement. Mujin told them they'd have to follow every grueling order if they joined, and all four roared their commitment in unison. Exhausted by their persistence, Mujin relented, officially declaring them warriors of the Blazing Wa clan. Soon, they reached Yang Su's opulent estate, and the old man nervously ushered them inside. The servants were terrified by the new, grim-faced guests. Yang Su just barked at them to prepare a feast in the side hall. But Mujin cut him off, telling him to skip the meal. They were going straight to the treasure vault. Yang Su nodded and led the way. The household staff nearly fainted under the menacing aura of the four demons. Mujin was disgusted by the sheer wealth Yang Su had amassed from his victims over the years. Just then, they ran into a warrior named by Su Jin. He suspiciously asked Yang Su if he was in some kind of trouble. Yang Su tried to play it off, urging him to go back to his room, but Su Jin demanded the truth. Mujin stepped in, asking Su Jin why he was sticking his nose where it didn't belong after being told to beat it. He noted the guy was clearly just a guest. He told him to mind his manners, as a guest has no business meddling in family affairs. Su Jin sneered at Mujin, calling him a loudmouthed brat. John Mook bristled, ready to tear Su Jin apart. But Yang Su frantically begged them to calm down, claiming it was all a big misunderstanding. Yang Su told Su Jin to relax and introduced Mujin and the four giants as his honored guests. Instead of backing down, Su Jin became even more arrogant upon hearing Mujin led the Wa clan. Mujin ignored the insults, telling him to get out of the way once he was done yapping. As Mujin tried to pass, Su Jin accused him of being a disgrace for traveling with demonic trash and bullying the weak. He claimed Mujin's ancestors were weeping in the afterlife. He didn't stop there, continuing to pile on the insults and calling Mujin a pathetic loser. Even Yang Su shouted that Su Jin was crossing a dangerous line. But Su Jin bragged that as a master, he would never be intimidated by lowlives like Mujin. One of the brothers unsheathed his blade, desperate to put Su Jin in his place. He looked to Mujin for the green light. Mujin told him to stand down, deciding this loudmouth needed a personal lesson. He leaped down into the courtyard, beckoning Su Jin to come and prove his words. Su Jin grinned, relishing the chance to show off. Su Jin charged Mujin, aiming a lethal thrust at his chest. But Mujin caught the strike on the edge of his massive greatsword. He gave the man props for his blade work, but noted he was severely lacking in raw power. Mujin continued to toy with Su Jin, and it wasn't long before Su Jin felt heavy, bone-rattling vibrations coursing through his weapon. The four demons watched with grins, knowing the guy was finished because Mujin had him trapped in a corner. They joked that his sword was seconds away from snapping, and if it held, his skull certainly wouldn't. Exactly as they predicted, Su Jin's blade shattered into a cloud of shards. Mujin flashed a predatory smirk and sent the man hurtling into the stone wall. The four demons didn't blink at the outcome. It was exactly what they expected. Then, Mujin barked at one of them to fetch him a staff, since the man claimed Mujin's grandfather was weeping in the afterlife. Mujin decided he'd personally send him down there to check for himself. Mujin began a systematic beatdown, delivering strikes so brutal that the man's screams echoed through every corner of the estate. The four demons were genuinely impressed seeing Mujin thrash the guy like he owed him blood. Yang Su went into a full-blown panic. Realizing Su Jin was on death's door, he scrambled to Mujin's feet, begging for mercy and promising to pay 10 times the life price. Yang Su stammered that Su Jin had deep ties to the unorthodox faction, warning it would be a nightmare if such a figure died under his roof. Yang Su swore he would cover Su Jin's ransom no matter how astronomical the cost. Mujin chuckled at that, mocking Yang Su for finally putting all his chips on the table. A moment later, They stepped into the treasure vault, where Mujin marveled at just how filthy rich Yang-su actually was. Mujin got straight to business, suggesting they start the audit. He began with the 4 demons, valuing each of their lives at 500 gold taels. Yang-su was speechless. Mujin had already recruited those 4, yet he was still charging for their heads. Mujin kept going, pricing shattered limbs at 200 taels and a soul at 300. Then Mujin informed Yang-su that Sujin's disrespect cost an even 1,000 gold taels. Finally, he tacked on a 3,000 gold tael fee for emotional distress. After tallying it all up, Mujin coldly told the man he wanted the entire vault. He asked if there were any complaints, but Yang-su just wept in silence because Mujin was more ruthless than any mountain bandit he'd ever met. Without skipping a beat, the other 4 started stuffing every coin and ingot into bags. As they worked, Mujin's eyes locked onto a folding screen tucked in the corner. He could feel a strange, potent energy bleeding out from the artwork. Yang-su caught Mujin's intense gaze fixed on the piece. Yang-su asked if the screen caught his eye, but Mujin played it cool, saying he wasn't sure yet. Yang-su mentioned it was a legendary masterpiece by Grandmaster Gang Susan. Then, in a desperate bid to please him, Yang-su told Mujin to take it as a gift. Mujin didn't hesitate for a second, leaving Yang-su staggered by the young man's bottomless greed. Once the carriage was bulging with loot, Mujin announced he was taking the horses and the ride as well. Since the old man clearly wouldn't be traveling anymore, Yang-su just nodded weakly and let it go. So Mujin and the 4 demons galloped off into the distance. But not before Mujin shouted back, telling Yang-su to try an honest day's work for once. Mujin promised they'd meet again, though Yang-su prayed to every god that they wouldn't, considering he'd been picked clean. Yang-su sat in the dirt, wondering what cosmic sins he'd committed to cross paths with a psycho like Mujin. When the crew rolled back into the Wa Manor, Masak looked like he'd seen a ghost. He frantically asked where all this treasure came from, convinced Mujin had slaughtered a small village for it. Mujin promised no one died for the gold, but told him to stop complaining and start counting since they were broke. Then Mujin asked Masak how old he thought the 4 demons were. Masak didn't hesitate, saying they looked like they were well into their 40s. Mujin grinned, looking forward to breaking that news to the boys. Mujin then asked about the elders, as the manor was quiet. Masak remembered they were hosting VIPs in the hall and had given strict orders to bring Mujin in the second he stepped through the gate. Mujin was baffled by the news of guests, assuming more frauds had arrived, but Masak set him straight and begged him not to punch anyone this time. Shortly after, Mujin walked into the reception hall. The elders looked relieved and introduced him to 3 merchant chiefs who had kept the clan afloat during its darkest years. The first introduced himself as Peng Gunno, leader of the Pyongyang merchant group. The second was Dong Guangyul of the Murong Association, and the third was Huang Zhouchong, master of the Golden Wealth Manor. The 3 were genuinely happy to see Mujin back on his feet, and Mujin showed them proper respect. After a few polite rounds of tea and pleasantries, Mujin bluntly asked if they were here to collect their debts, catching the merchants off guard. They assured him they hadn't come to squeeze him, only to celebrate his recovery. They even offered to leave if their presence felt like a burden. Mujin thanked them for their loyalty, but insisted that the Wa clan pays its bills. He explained he was still catching up on the accounts after his long sleep. He demanded the total figure owed to each group. Do try to stop him, but Mujin ignored the elder, insisting he needed the hard numbers before he could set a payment schedule. Seeing he was serious, the 3 merchants agreed to lay out the estimates. The Pyongyang group was owed 5,300 gold taels, Golden Wealth Manor, 3,200, and the Murong Association, 1,900 gold taels. Mujin quickly tallied it up, a grand total of 10,400 gold taels. With the numbers on the table, the chiefs finally opened up about the real trouble they were facing. They confessed they were being strangled by the Yunghua merchant group, which piqued Mujin's interest. The 3 explained that Yunghua was using its massive bankroll to crush them as punishment for supporting the Hua family. The Yunghua group had monopolized the trade routes and blacklisted any business associated with them. They were even bold, enough to bribe and poach their most trusted managers. The chiefs admitted they were at a breaking point and couldn't take the heat much longer. It looked like they were being bullied into selling off their creditor rights. They had no choice but to come clean. Mujin told them he was deeply moved by their resilience so far. He acknowledged that they were the only ones who didn't jump ship when the clan was sinking. Mujin declared that such kindness deserved an equal reward. He guaranteed that every single copper of the debt would be settled immediately. The 3 merchants were absolutely staggered by the claim. Mujin went further, promising that as interest for their loyalty, the Hua clan would personally break the Yunghua group's stranglehold on them. The trio sat in stunned silence before asking, if he planned to fight a trade war with his fists. Mujin just nodded. That was exactly his plan. Du practically choked on his tea, reminding Mujin that Yonghua was protected by the terrifying Kongtong sect, one of the most elite and dangerous powerhouses in the entire martial world. The merchants saw Du spiraling and tried to calm him down. They insisted that just being repaid was a miracle. They didn't want the Hua family starting a blood feud with Kongtong on their account. They assured Du they were happy just to break even, while Mujin sat there in icy silence. Once the meeting wrapped up, the three chiefs took their leave. They offered their best wishes for the clan's future prosperity. The second they were gone, Mujin ordered Du to gather every scrap of intel on the Yonghua group, finances, routes, connections, and their ties to Kongtong. Du was horrified, realizing Mujin wasn't just talking big. Mujin laughed, asking why Du thought he was joking when he always settles his scores. Mujin explained that if they didn't cut out the Yonghua cancer now, it would eventually kill the clan. He added that if the Hua clan couldn't protect its partners, no one would ever trust them again. So he was going to settle this once and for all. Still, he knew everyone else probably thought he'd finally lost his mind again. Just then, John Mook arrived to report that their task was finished. Mujin smiled and told the group to come in and meet the clan's leadership. Du and the chief manager nearly had heart attacks when the four demons marched in. The giants bowed low to the elders, asking for their mentorship. But the two old men were so paralyzed by fear, they couldn't squeeze out a word. Mujin told them to hold their breath, because he had a real shocker for them. He revealed that these old men were actually younger than he was, sending the elders into a spiral of disbelief. Even Ma Sok, standing in the back, refused to believe his own ears. Meanwhile, the four brothers were confused as to why the elders looked like they were facing a firing squad. The elders eventually found their voices and asked why he'd recruited these monsters without a single word of consultation. Mujin shot back, asking if they consulted him when they tried to smuggle his siblings out of the house. Mujin made it clear. He was the one making the calls now, as the future head of the clan. He then turned to Ma Sok and told him to go buy the best cow in town. Du protested, crying that they were broke after the 10,000 tael payout. Mujin didn't say a word. He simply led them to the carriage full of gold, leaving the entire room in a state of absolute, jaw-dropping shock. Mujin claimed he had stripped Yangsu of every penny, but swore he hadn't taken his life. Du questioned Mujin about the mysterious folding screen, and Mujin explained that Yangsu boasted it was a masterpiece by Gang Su-sin. Du nearly fainted from the revelation, and Mujin noted that the minimum price they could fetch for such a treasure was 90 gold taels, which is why he seized it. Since they were flush with cash, Mujin ordered Ma Sok to stop whining and go secure the finest beef. Meanwhile, Mujin sensed a hidden secret lurking within the screen's artwork. At dawn the next day, Mujin summoned his siblings, the four demons, and the clan's trainers. Mujin announced he had reached a verdict. Everyone was in desperate need of a grueling overhaul. He declared that the foundation of any blade is the body that wields it, and no matter how legendary the technique, it is utterly worthless if the physical vessel is fragile. Thus, Mujin proclaimed the start of a special training regime under his direct and ruthless supervision. He pointed out that the grain sacks at their feet weighed a solid 144 pounds and would serve as their constant training partners. Mujin warned them that this rice was strictly not for consumption, and if he caught a single person stealing a grain, they would be meeting their maker. On the other hand, Dujin and Soyen noticed their own burdens only topped out at 33 pounds. Jinping asked Mujin what exactly they were supposed to do with these heavy loads, and he commanded them to hoist the weight onto their shoulders immediately. Jinping was stunned, while another warrior complained that the bag was so massive it would take 2 men just to budget. However, Mujin's expression turned icy as he roared at them to lift the sacks or prepare for a life-threatening thrashing. He reminded them that while his blade might be dull, a single heavy strike would turn their bones to powder. He gave them a simple ultimatum: shoulder the burden or face him in a one-on-one duel to the death. Petrified by the threat, the martial artists scrambled to lift the heavy grain sacks. However, Mujin singled out the 4 demons, ordering each of them to carry 3 bags apiece. If they had any objections, he invited them to test their luck against him in combat. The sheer terror of fighting Mujin forced the 4 to instantly hoist 3 sacks each. Their eyes bulged from the immense strain. The elders watched the scene in absolute horror. They began to wonder what kind of sadistic game Mujin was playing with his own men. Mujin kept barking encouragement, insisting they had the strength as long as their will was unbreakable. Mujin reminded them that nothing is impossible when the only alternative is a cold grave. Once everyone was loaded up, including the youngsters, he ordered them to begin squats. He announced the target was a grueling 200 repetitions. Mujin led the first set as a demonstration. The group let out a collective wail as they struggled to keep their balance. But Mujin showed no mercy, driving them further, telling them to brace their cores and stand tall if they valued their lives. One man felt his entire body reaching its breaking point, yet he knew surrender wasn't an option, because failing meant a brutal beating from Mujin's own hands. The elders questioned the logic of such a punishing method for their martial artists, finding it exhausting just to be a spectator to the agony. As they labored, Mujin used biting insults to fuel them, calling them leeches who hid behind the name of the clan. He told them those who couldn't endure a little sweat didn't deserve the air they breathed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they finally reached the 200th rep, and one disciple collapsed the very instant the count was finished. Mujin was unimpressed, scoffing that it took them all day just to finish a simple warm-up. He called their endurance pathetic and said they weren't worthy of their titles. He then declared that from this moment forward, they and the rice sacks were inseparable. They were to train, eat, and even find sleep while tethered to their heavy burdens. He stated those bags would be their only companions until he decided otherwise. He then commanded the manager to bind everyone securely to their respective sacks, warning that anyone who dared to untie the knot was effectively untying their own life. Dung was so drained, he found himself hallucinating about his mother's face. As Mujin retired to his quarters, he instructed Masak that every meal from now on must be centered around beef. Masak asked about the bath, but Mujin told him to wait for the signal, the moment his head hit the pillow. Mujin fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. That night, the exhausted group huddled together at the estate, struggling to eat while the heavy rice sacks remained lashed to their backs. During the meal, one trembling warrior turned to his superior, noting that his hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold his chopsticks, even though the workout had primarily targeted their legs. The senior sighed, admitting that the entire squad was suffering the same strange fatigue. It was a level of exhaustion they had never experienced under their previous master, which made the whole situation feel eerily intense. The following day, the torturous routine resumed without pause, and this time they were forced to endure endless sets of push-ups. Mujin scrutinized their form with a hawk's eye, even as he performed the exercise right alongside them. Jinbin was amazed that the warriors were still functioning despite the hellish conditions. The next day, they took the grind to the streets, duck-walking through the village with their sacks. The local villagers watched in a mix of awe and terror, wondering what madness had gripped the manor. The relentless pace continued the day after, focusing on heavy overhead bag presses. Even Mujin felt the deep burn in his muscles, yet he was secretly impressed, because his younger siblings were showing more grit than he had anticipated. He began to contemplate whether it was time to turn up the heat, and the next morning, he led the weary group to the banks of a roaring, fast-moving river. The martial artists were paralyzed at the sight, questioning why they had been brought to such a place. Mujin announced that the day's objective was to forge across the current while carrying their weights. The violent rapids were terrifying enough. Worse still, a massive waterfall loomed just downstream, turning the exercise into a potential death trap. While the men panicked, So-Yun was actually thrilled to tackle such an extreme challenge. Suddenly she realized Dujin was a poor swimmer and thought they should warn Mujin. At that moment, the elders pleaded with Mujin to stop, claiming the crossing was suicide. They argued the current was a known killer, especially for those burdened with heavy sacks. Mujin laughed off their paranoia, stating he had already calculated the risks. The elders were baffled, wondering when he could have possibly tested such a thing. Mujin ignored their pleas. He told the warriors to cross the water or prepare to face his wrath on land. The moment they realized he wasn't joking, the men started diving in right after him. Even Mook told his brothers he would much rather drown than face Mujin's fury. Soon, every single one of them had plunged into the icy, churning water. Even Dujin felt he had no choice but to jump, despite his deep fear of the deep. Dujin was desperate to prove he carried the true spirit of the Hua family. It was that inner fire that forced him to take the leap. However, the river's strength was overwhelming, and Dujin struggled to keep his head above water. Before he could react, his footing vanished, and he began to be dragged into the depths. The elders witnessed the tragedy and shrieked at Mujin. That Dujin was being lost to the current. Without hesitation, Jinba dove after the boy, and managed to snag him just before the river claimed him. He told the boy to take one last breath and hold on for dear life, because they were about to take the plunge over the falls. There was no time left for a rescue. With that, the two of them disappeared over the edge of the thundering waterfall. The elders let out a cry of pure anguish. However, moments later, Dujin and Jinpin popped up in the calm water below, Jinbin praised the boy's courage. And Dujin gasped out a thank you to the man who had just saved his life. Mujin arrived on the scene, immediately checking if Dujin was all right or if he had sustained any head injuries. Dujin comforted his brother, explaining he was safe because Jinbin had dived in to rescue him at the perfect moment. Jinbin, meanwhile, was startled by Mujin's sudden appearance, questioning how long he had been shadowed by him. Mujin cautioned Dujin against being reckless, noting that any harm coming to him would be a disaster. Dujin looked at his brother and vowed to see the training through, refusing to remain a helpless child. With a burning gaze, Dujin declared that only by forging his strength could he become a worthy warrior of the Hua lineage. The following day, the disciples were tasked with scaling a sheer cliff face while hauling their heavy rice sacks. Once they reached the halfway point, Mujin barked at them to increase their pace, reminding them that a slip from this height meant certain death. A brown-haired warrior muttered that Mujin was a complete lunatic and regretted not staying in bed. But in a flash, his footing failed. He began a terrifying plunge toward the ground. In desperation, he lunged for another disciple, clinging to him and sobbing for help. His comrade gritted his teeth, yelling at him to seize the jagged rock right in front of him. Later, the group sprinted back to the estate like demons were chasing them, spurred by Mujin's threat that laggards would have to carry him. A child watching the spectacle asked his mother if those men were prisoners on their way to the gallows. The mother shook her head, explaining that those were the elite guardians of the Hua family. Suddenly, So-Yun buckled and hit the dirt. Elder Joe scrambled to her side, full of concern. The girl put on a weary face, piteously asking Joe to give her a lift back to the manor. Joe hoisted her up instantly, but as they overtook the others, the warriors realized the girl was totally faking her exhaustion. Mujin caught the bitter glances from a few of the men. He invited them to go ahead and faint like little girls if they were so obsessed with comparing themselves to her. However, he coldly added that anyone following her lead was essentially writing their own obituary. By the time they reached home, the entire squad collapsed in a heap, utterly drained of life. The warrior who had saved the brown-haired man earlier stood up and began a fierce lecture, blasting him for constantly falling behind and slowing everyone down. He roared in the man's face, demanding to know when he'd stop being a burden. He told him to quit the clan if he couldn't hack it. The brown-haired man whimpered that he only kept going because he was terrified of Mujin's death threats. It turned out he had lost his heart for the martial path long ago. He simply feared that Mujin would execute in the moment he tried to walk away. The large man yelled that it was exactly that cowardice that kept him tripping over his own feet. He threatened to finish the weakling himself, claiming he was a stain on the clan's reputation. Jinbin stepped in, reminding the giant that not every man was forged with the same iron constitution. The brute reacted with a cheap shot, landing a punch right in Jinbin's gut, vowing that he would start his cleaning spree by eliminating Jinbin first. Mook moved in like a shadow, telling the brute to stand down because Jinbin was right. He argued the boy was doing his best and reminded them they were all brothers in arms. The giant snapped that mercy wouldn't make them stronger, but Mook countered that Mujin had a massive head start in training, so everyone's progress would naturally vary. Mook challenged the man, stating he could only spill such venom once he managed to best Mook in a duel. The brute stormed off in a rage, warning the brown-haired kid that his life would be forfeit if he messed up again. Deep into the night, the giant was returning from the latrine when a sound caught his ear. He peeked around a corner to find Mujin practicing his forms alone under the moonlight. The man was mesmerized by the sheer, blistering speed of Mujin's movements. He realized with a sinking heart that Mujin was in a stratosphere far above his own, even though they were roughly the same age. Suddenly, Mujin's eyes sharpened as he sensed the spectator. He ordered the lurker to reveal themselves before he dragged them out by force. Forced to step out, the man was met with Mujin's sharp question about what he was doing out so late. He stuttered that he was just passing by and got caught up in the display. He swore he wasn't spying, but Mujin cut him off. Mujin admitted he was getting bored of the current routine. He told the man to ditch his sack and draw his steel. The man was baffled, but obeyed. Mujin commanded him to attack with everything he had. The warrior lunged at Mujin with a surprising burst of velocity. Yet Mujin parried the strike with casual ease, never even taking his hand from behind his back. The man continued his assault, but suddenly, he realized his body was moving faster and more fluidly than ever before. Mujin nodded in approval, acknowledging the man's physical growth. However, he pointed out that his concentration was still wavering. Mujin vanished and reappeared behind the man's guard, delivering a sharp, stinging slap to his back. The force of it sent the man face first into the dirt. Surprisingly, the warrior bounced back to his feet immediately. Mujin was impressed, noting that previously that hit would have ended the fight, but his durability had finally reached a usable level. The man felt the difference too. His body was no longer the fragile thing it used to be. Mujin gave him a rare word of praise and dismissed him to get some sleep. The next morning, Mujin informed the troops that the day would be dedicated to core strength. He instructed them to grip the rice bags between their thighs and hang from the beams. The first squad obeyed the grueling order, while the rest watched, trembling at the thought of the burn. After the ordeal, they were sent back on a run through the village. The brown-haired man was about to give up when the giant suddenly reached out. He urged the boy to keep his legs moving, promising they were nearly at the finish line. Mujin watched the scene from afar and smirked, seeing his psychological tactics finally bear fruit. A month later, Mujin gathered the warriors to declare the end of their special hell. He gave them leave to drop their bags and cut the ropes, just as cheers began to erupt. Mujin announced this boot camp would be a biannual tradition in summer and winter, he noted. The next session was only months away in the winter, but he reassured them it would be easier now that they had built a foundation. Mujin concluded the speech by reminding them that a powerful physical frame is the only way to wield a powerful sword. However, he announced it was finally time for him to personally spar with each of them to sharpen their battle instincts. He called them out one by one to face him, and as expected, he left the entire squad bruised and battered. But through the pain came insight, and through insight came evolution. With the training complete, the 4 demons were formally instated as clan instructors. Step by step, the Hua family began to reclaim the prestige it once held, once again becoming a beacon of power in the Xishan province. Later, Du watched Du Jin sparring with an instructor and was amazed to see the boy holding his own. The elders were overjoyed to see the light return to Du Jin's eyes. They were relieved the 4 demons had settled in so well, crediting Mujin's sudden leadership for saving the clan. Du remarked that things were going so perfectly it almost made him nervous. Mujin had been missing for days, locked inside the storehouse, leaving everyone wondering when he'd reappear. Unbeknownst to them, Mujin was locked in a fierce mental struggle with the folding screen. Mujin discovered that the more internal energy he pushed into the artifact, the more violently it retaliated with a counterforce. But he relished the challenge, determined to see who would crack first. Days later, the screen's hidden energy finally depleted, allowing Mujin to shatter its secrets. Mujin stepped toward the mirror and triggered a hidden mechanism. A concealed compartment opened, revealing a jar of pungent green liquid that smelled absolutely foul. Mujin muttered that the prankster who rigged the folding screen was a certified freak. He finally grasped why that toxic, unsettling aura had been seeping out. Suddenly, a hidden volume tumbled out from the depths of the screen. Mujin stooped to retrieve the fallen text. His jaw dropped when he realized it was the heart-severing sword manual, the very treasure they had tried to conceal within the screen years ago. Mujin sat to devour the contents immediately, but he quickly felt a wave of boredom. He judged the techniques to be only on par with a mid-tier master from Hubei. Despite the slight disappointment, he didn't view the discovery as a total loss. He noted that the previous owner utilized a cultivation path entirely different from his own muscle-bound style. Mujin realized this specific art would actually be a perfect fit for the Blazing Hua clan. Essentially, his struggle to teach the warriors swordsmanship stemmed from their clashing energy foundations. The Peerless Nine Swords relies heavily on raw physical agility. Conversely, the Blazing Hua clan is rooted in fire qigong. It's a vital detail that these two energies are fundamentally like oil and water. Merging them carelessly is a one-way ticket to a mental breakdown. This is why the Peerless Nine Swords is strictly reserved for blank slate beginners with no prior training. Mujin felt a stroke of luck. His reincarnated body's shattered dantian had left him in a state of perfect emptiness. Because of that, he could master his movement arts without any internal conflict. A grin spread across Mujin's face as he gripped the book, knowing this was destined to become the new legacy of the Blazing Hua clan. Shortly after, Mujin presented the manual to the elders and commanded them to study up. The elders nearly hyperventilated when they saw the title. They told Mujin this was the authentic heart-severing manual. Missing for over 15 years, they couldn't fathom such elite secrets were gathering dust inside furniture. Mujin shrugged, guessing that even Yangsu had no idea he was sitting on a gold mine. Du asked if Mujin was truly ready to distribute this to the rank and file, and Mujin reminded him that the clan was desperate for a signature style. This was their miracle. Mujin announced classes would start tomorrow, though he wasn't sure if the instructors were too proud to learn. As he left for a nap, he told the elders they were welcome to copy the text for their own training. The moment he was out of earshot, the old men began celebrating as if they'd just uncovered a mountain of jade. The warriors were equally ecstatic, feeling like they'd hit the ultimate jackpot. For years, the clan lacked a soul, and having an elite technique finally gave the men a real sense of brotherhood. Naturally, Jin and Soyun were also buzzing with excitement to start the new lessons. The four demons, however, stuck to their own brutal routines. Jin was confident that even without the new manual, those four had the grit to become absolute powerhouses on their own. In the blink of an eye, another month of training had passed. Jin stepped into the courtyard and was baffled to find the place as quiet as a tomb. Jin turned to Ma Sok, demanding to know where everyone had crawled off to. Ma Sok explained that the Rising Dragon tournament was currently in full swing. Jin looked blank, and Ma Sok realized he'd forgotten the biggest event in Xixiang, held only once every 5 years. Word was the champion would be invited to the Great Orthodox Conference. Hearing that, Jin sprinted toward the city gates before Ma Sok could even finish the sentence. Jin cursed Ma Sok under his breath for not giving him a heads-up sooner. He felt a surge of saltiness that the old geezers had snuck off to enjoy the spectacle without him. Meanwhile, Joe and the youngsters had already reached the buzzing tournament grounds. As they were checking in, a first-class nuisance decided to make an appearance. It was Jang Si-hun, the chief manager of the rival Beck family. Accompanied by their prodigy, Beck Sion, Jang put on a mock show of shock at seeing the Wa clan present. Joe brushed off the hostility with a polite nod, but the man refused to stop his verbal assault. He snickered, wondering how they even scraped together the registration fee. He asked Joe if his clan would have to skip meals for a month to afford the entry. He even brought up the 15 years of unpaid association dues they owed. Jang sneered at the kids, commenting that they looked half-starved. By now, Jin and Soyun's tempers were reaching a boiling point. At that same moment, Jin was wandering aimlessly through the city streets. He deeply regretted his impulsive exit and wished he'd asked for directions. He scanned the horizon and decided to follow the loudest roar of the crowd. Meanwhile, two distinctive travelers, a dignified old man and his lovely granddaughter, were enjoying a leisurely stroll. The girl was captivated by the local charm. Suddenly, Jin blurred past them, barking at her to clear the path. He skidded to a halt a few paces ahead to ask where the tournament was located. Annoyed, Jin snapped at the girl for the location, but she just glared at him with pure loathing. Jin asked why she was looking at him like he was dirt. Her grandfather stepped in, calmly explaining they were also outsiders searching for the arena. The old man kindly asked Jin to share the location if he happened to stumble upon it first. Jin just sped off, telling them to use their own legs and find it themselves. As Jin vanished like a ghost, the girl asked her grandfather what was wrong with that boy, having never met anyone so incredibly abrasive. The old man chuckled, sensing a touch of madness in Jin's energy, the moment he made that observation. The girl's eyes widened as she realized her grandfather was referring to that Jin, the direct descendant of Wadute. The old man smiled, glad he'd made the trip. He could tell things were about to get very interesting. Back at the arena entrance, the standoff between Joe and Jang was nearing a flashpoint. Joe firmly stated that their outstanding debts will be settled in due time. Jang didn't miss a beat, mockingly asking which century he should expect the payment. He went as far as to insult the clan's ancestral techniques as worthless trash. Finally losing his cool, Joe's hand dropped to his hilt. He warned Jang to watch his mouth in front of the children, as his patience had officially run dry. Jang drew his steel instantly, daring Joe to make a move. Just as the blades were about to clash, Jin sauntered onto the scene. He told them to sheath their pride, noting that today was for the kids. It would be pathetic for the adults to steal the spotlight. With a voice like thunder and a face full of menace, Jin reminded them they were here for the hope of Xuchong. He walked right past a stunned Jang. Recovering from his shock, Jang went right back to hurling insults at Jin's retreating back. Jin ignored the noise and turned to his siblings, asking why they kept such a massive event a secret. While Jin fumbled for words, Soyun piped up, telling Jin they wanted to bring home a trophy as a surprise. Jin softened, patting her head and praising her fighting spirit. Predictably, Jang couldn't help but chime in again. He mocked their status, but Jin fired back that a clan's worth is measured by its sword, not the weight of its purse. Suddenly, the old man from the street appeared, clapping and praising Jin's sharp wit. The old man suggested Jang put his sword away and enjoy the festivities. Jang told the old-timer to stay in his lane since he wasn't part of the Wa family business. Jang doubled down, sneering that poverty was a stain on any martial bloodline. He told Jin he should have at least bought the kids some decent clothes before showing up. He joked that the entry fee probably wiped out their savings. Du was ready to explode, but the old man stepped in once more. He remarked that fine silk doesn't make a master out of a weakling. Jang, irritated by the interference, told the old man to buzz off. Finally, Jang decided to end the conversation, acting as if talking to lowlives was beneath him. He said he looked forward to seeing if their budget training actually worked. The old man noticed the dark fire flickering in Mujin's eyes. He told him not to let a small man's words bother him. As fools are a dime a dozen. Mujin relaxed and gave a knowing smile. Joe, however, couldn't stop staring at the elderly stranger. He felt a nagging sense of recognition, but just couldn't put a name to the face. Just then, a steward arrived to lead Mujin and his group to their assigned places. Mujin stepped into the grand arena. He was genuinely impressed by the lavish spread laid out on their dining table. The kids were ready to dive into the feast, but Mujin warned them to keep it light. He cautioned them that they needed to stay sharp for whenever their names were called. To no one's surprise, the Beck family was escorted to the VIP section. Jang looked back one last time. He flashed a cold, taunting smirk directly at Mujin. Mujin stared back, daydreaming about the exact moment he'd get to dismantle Jang. In his mind, he was already deciding whether to start with the man's eyes or his teeth. The old man from before suddenly sat down, asking if Mujin would mind the company. Mujin wondered why this guy was sticking to him like glue, but he told him the seat was as if he wanted it. The kids reached for the food, but Mujin stopped them with a mental whisper. He told them to wait until he had tasted everything first to ensure it was safe. The old man's granddaughter appeared, pouring him a cup of premium liquor. The old man noticed Mujin wasn't touching the refreshments and asked why. Mujin simply lied and said he'd had a massive meal right before arriving. A moment later, the chief official, Suk Ki-do, took the stage to officially open the tournament. As the head of the powerful Suk clan, he welcomed everyone and assured them that the finest delicacies were theirs to enjoy. Suddenly, Suk's eyes landed on the old man sitting at Mujin's table. His face went pale, and he scrambled over in a complete panic. Suk dropped into a deep, respectful bow. The old man seemed amused he'd been spotted, while Suk stammered that no one could fail to recognize the legendary Poison King, Tang Suman. The entire arena fell into a deathly silence as the old man's identity was revealed. The weight of his legendary status left everyone absolutely paralyzed with awe. Only 4 legends hold the title of Emperor in the Central Plains: the Wudong Sword Emperor, the Shaolin Fist Emperor, the Celestial Emperor of the 4 Heavens, and the Tang Clan's Poison Emperor. The crowd was stunned that one of the realm's absolute powerhouses would grace a minor junior tournament in Xuchong with his presence. The moment the truth hit him, Jang began to spiral into a panic, realizing he had carelessly insulted a living legend. While everyone else was losing their minds in awe, Mujin remained perfectly composed. His calm stemmed from the fact that he already knew the old man's reputation from his previous life. He recalled that during the 15-year war with the Orthodox faction, for great clans, excluding the Namgung, refused to enter the fray against the demon god. Their hesitation came from a lack of clear motivation, compounded by the fact that their leaders and elite forces had been decimated by the demon god himself. It turns out the figure sitting before him was Tang Suman, the man destined to become the Poison Emperor. Suk eagerly invited Tang to move to the prestigious VIP section, but Tang made it clear he was perfectly content where he was. Suk was flustered, and in a desperate bid to win Tang's favor, he suggested that Mujin should also be upgraded to a better seat. Mujin flatly declined the offer, telling them to stop wasting time and get the competition moving. Meanwhile, Tang was captivated by Mujin. The more he observed the youth, the more he saw the shadow of a dear old friend. He saw the spirit of Mujin's grandfather, the very man who had rescued him from the depths of despair years ago. Suk then informed Mujin that the main event was starting and asked if he had any plans to jump into the ring. Mujin was puzzled by the question. The official explained he was referring to the upcoming Great Orthodox Martial Arts Conference and wanted to gauge Mujin's interest. Mujin dryly noted that the tournament offered 0 incentives, giving him no reason to waste his energy. Suddenly, Jang scrambled over to Tang, bowing low to offer a frantic apology for his earlier insolence. He pleaded that he had failed to recognize the legend's venerable face. Tang didn't even acknowledge his existence, continuing to sip his drink in icy silence. Annoyed by the lingering presence, Tang gestured for his granddaughter to clear away the pests. She stood up and commanded the onlookers to return to their places, as her grandfather desired absolute tranquility. Suk then signaled that the matches were commencing. Before the first strike, he laid out the essential regulations. He specified that only blunt wooden tools were permitted. Lethal maneuvers were strictly forbidden. He noted that a blue bag tossed by a judge signaled a pause, while a red bag ended the bout. With the rules established, he called the opening pair Beck Saijon and Soyeon. Soyeon was in the middle of enjoying a savory snack when she heard her name echoed through the arena. Mujin gave her a nod, telling her it was time to show the world the fruits of her grueling training. Across the ring, Saijon was brimming with arrogance, convinced he would make short work of her. Saijon swaggered onto the stage, sneering that she was nothing more than a stepping stone for his inevitable glory. He was taken aback when So-Yun fired back with a sharp, disrespectful retort. So-Yun told him to save the speeches and shut his mouth because his words were meaningless. Losing his temper, Saijon snarled that he would leave her with broken bones for that insult. Using a focused sound transmission, Mujin asked Joe if the rivalry with Jang's crew had always been this toxic. Du explained that while the Fire Emperor lived, things were stable, but after the Patriarch's succession, several traitors defected to the Baek clan. It turned out Jang was among those turncoats. As the Wa clan's influence waned, their hostility only grew more vicious. Mujin wondered why they had become such a persistent pain in the neck. Joe revealed that a fundamental clash of ideologies with the previous Patriarch had sparked a bitter, long-standing feud. Furthermore, the Baek clan had built their power by systematically poaching talent from the Wa family's dwindling ranks. Inside the ring, Saijon lunged forward with a fierce strike aimed at So-Yun. She effortlessly slipped the attack and hammered a counter kick into his solar plexus. Before Saijon could even catch his breath, So-Yun was already airborne. She drove her knee into his face with sickening precision, instantly shattering his nose. Saijon wailed in agony as So-Yun stood over him with a cold, triumphant gaze. She mocked his pathetic state as blood began to pour down his chin. The Tang clan leader was impressed by her mastery of kicking techniques and asked Mujin if he was the instructor. Mujin clarified that Elder Joe was the one who had refined her striking style. He noted that while her physical prowess was elite, he was curious to see her adaptability against an armed opponent. Meanwhile, Saijon had completely lost his composure, screaming like a madman. He vowed that he was going to end her life right there. Saijon charged again, swinging his wooden blade in a wild, undisciplined frenzy. So-Yun remained untouchable, weaving through his strikes with breathtaking grace. Hai watched in awe as her footwork allowed her to dance around every desperate swing. Becoming increasingly frantic, Saijon began hurling insults, calling her a slippery, annoying pest. He finally managed to press the advantage, forcing So-Yun toward the edge of the platform. She was trapped with nowhere left to retreat. Du-Jin and Elder Joe watched with bated breath, fearing So-Yun had finally run out of luck. On the other side, Jang was already celebrating the win. Saijon put all his weight into a final, crushing lunge. But to the absolute shock of the spectators, So-Yun dropped low and vaulted clean over his head. Saijon spun around in a fury, accusing So-Yun of doing nothing but fleeing. So-Yun grinned, informing him that he had just stepped right into her endgame. As Saijon blinked in confusion, So-Yun declared that the tables had turned. She claimed it was his turn to be cornered and raised her leg in a high, challenging stance. Saijon desperately raised his wooden sword to parry the coming blow. But before he could even brace himself, So-Yun delivered a thunderous kick to his temple, sending him sprawling across the floor in a daze. The elders were electrified by her sudden dominance and erupted into cheers. Jang, meanwhile, let out a low groan of pure frustration. Saijon tried to scramble back to his feet for one last stand. But So-Yun was on a completely different level. She began bouncing him around the ring like a toy. With a final, bone-cracking strike, Saijon was sent flying and his weapon shattered. Jang realized the situation had turned dire. He screamed for the officials to throw the blue bag and stop the fight. So-Yun towered over the fallen boy, ready to deliver the final blow, but the referee's intervention spared him. Instead of accepting his defeat, Saijon spat more poison from the ground. He threatened to bring his family's wrath down on the Wa clan and eliminate them all. That was the breaking point for So-Yun. She told him a broken sword wouldn't be enough to save him. He tried to hide behind the rules, claiming the match was paused, but So-Yun told him she didn't give a damn about the rules. She walked over and told him he could bring whoever he wanted to the manor later. But in this moment, his fate was sealed. Before he could scream for help, So-Yun lunged and began a relentless, bare-knuckle assault. He collapsed onto the boards, out cold. The Poison King watched the raw display with a look of grim fascination. Mujin, however, was on his feet cheering, shouting that his sister was a natural-born warrior. Jang roared at the referee, demanding to know why she wasn't penalized for ignoring the pause signal. Consequently, So-Yun was officially disqualified for her post-signal aggression. The elders lamented the loss, but Mujin was howling with laughter like he'd just seen a comedy. As So-Yun walked off the stage, she shot a defiant look at Jang and stuck her tongue out. When she rejoined the group, the elders scolded her for throwing away the victory. So-Yun simply shrugged, stating she valued crushing Saijon's pride more than winning a trophy. Mujin let out a boisterous laugh, loving her unapologetic attitude. He began a ridiculous, mocking victory dance in the middle of the aisle. He celebrated as if she had just conquered the entire tournament. Zhang's face turned purple with rage as he watched Mujin's taunting performance. Mujin was so thrilled he told the Poison King they should drink until the sunrise. On Tang's credit, of course. Tang then asked So-yun why she held back the clan's secret techniques, as she would have dominated easily with them. So-yun explained that using secret arts on a garbage opponent like Saijon was a waste of energy. She knew she could win with her fists and didn't want to show her hand too early. Tang let out a thunderous laugh, thoroughly enjoying her ruthless logic. He ordered another round of spirits, and the celebration at their table grew even louder. The entire arena was transfixed by the sight of Mujin casually drinking with the Poison King. Even as other matches progressed, all eyes remained locked on Mujin and his legendary companion. Even Chief Suk began to feel the mounting pressure of the unfolding situation. Shortly after, the clash between Du Jin and Chief Suk's champion, Chu Yong, commenced. As Du Jin rose from the table, Mujin fired up his little brother, telling him to show everyone his true grit. The Tang clan leader watched with intrigue as Du Jin approached the stage, wielding a blade, rather than choosing empty-handed combat. The referee signaled the start, and Chief Suk felt certain that his star pupil would dominate the field. He was desperate to capture the Tang clan leader's attention. However, Chu Yong's opening gambit proved to be his final mistake. Du Jin sidestepped with ease and delivered a decisive, lightning-fast strike to his opponent's head. The spectators sat in stunned silence, completely floored by the display because they couldn't even register the speed of the finishing move. In stark contrast, the Hua family section erupted in cheers, celebrating Du Jin's effortless win. The Tang clan leader was genuinely moved by the blade work, noting he had no idea the Hua family possessed such refined techniques. Mujin then explained that the style his brother displayed wasn't just flashy, but rooted in profound martial secrets. While the crowd hummed with curiosity, Mujin suddenly stood up. He hoisted the heart-severing sword manual high for every eye in the arena to see. The onlookers were nearly mesmerized by the intense presence of the manual. Mujin then seized the moment with a bold declaration, announcing that anyone eager to master this art was welcome to join his clan. He swore to them that the contents of the book would act as a catalyst for their growth on the warrior's path. As expected, the arena exploded into a frenzy. Voices roared from every corner, expressing desperate interest in his offer. Mujin directed the recruits to Elder Du. Du didn't miss a beat, readying his brush and shouting for the interested crowd to form an orderly line. The Tang clan leader let out a hearty laugh, remarking that Mujin truly earned his madman title for running a recruitment drive mid-tournament. Meanwhile, Chief Suk's temper reached its boiling point. He secretly cursed the Tang clan leader's presence for tying his hands. Deng stepped closer, whispering if he was really going to stand by while Mujin and the Hua family ran the show. Chief Suk grumbled that with the Poison King as a witness, their options for direct interference were non-existent. Deng smirked, revealing he had a cunning backup plan. They decided to manipulate the tournament brackets to clear a path for Suk Yoso. Following the Hua family's decline, Chief Suk and Chief Beck had been scheming to seize control of the regional power vacuum. Their main tool was the quinquennial Rising Dragon tournament. By rigging the draws, they ensured their disciples won, granting them entry to the prestigious Great Orthodox Martial Arts Conference to expand their own reach. They aimed to dominate the Little Dragon tournament, as well to tighten their grip on the region. As the final bout of the round of 32 was announced, the official introduced Suk Yoso as the fighter set to face Ban Iwan of the Half Moon sect. It was painfully clear that the victor of this match would be on a collision course with Du Jin. Suddenly, Elder Du realized that Gyoso's presence in the ring was a blatant violation of the rules. Elder Du noted that Gyoso was the previous champion and had reportedly been honing his skills with the Dansong sect. Even his adversary, Ban, looked visibly shaken upon seeing Gyoso standing across from him. He questioned how Gyoso could compete. Ban reminded him the age limit was strictly under 14, to which Gyoso gave a smug, dismissive reply. Gyoso insisted he was still only 14 years old. Ban tried to call him out on the lie, knowing he had already turned 15. But Gyoso didn't give him a chance to finish, launching a brutal, preemptive strike. Gyoso neutralized Ban with chilling efficiency, claiming a swift victory for the round. Gyoso boasted that technically, his birthday hadn't passed yet. Elder Joe was vibrating with rage and moved to protest the unfairness. But Mujin held him back, coolly stating that Gyoso was exactly the kind of high-level test his brother needed. Moments later, Du Jin walked onto the stage to confront Gyoso. The Tang clan leader felt a sudden shift in tension, realizing this match was essentially the true final in disguise. Despite the clear gap in experience, the elders and So-yun cheered with everything they had. Meanwhile, Mujin watched with a razor-sharp focus, analyzing every movement. Gyoso taunted Dujin, claiming the style he used was the reason his own brother had been humiliated earlier. Dujin calmly asked if he was motivated by a petty grudge, but Gyoso told Dujin to quit his yapping. Gyoso vowed that he would ensure Dujin never held a blade again, without a second's delay. Gyoso surged forward using the intricate 12 light sword steps. Dujin was forced into a desperate defensive stance as Gyoso's relentless pressure began to take its toll. The Tang clan leader carefully weighed the combatant skills. He could see that Dujin was struggling to find an opening against Gyoso's superior technique. Chief Suk watched with a smug grin as Gyoso slowly dismantled the Hua family's pride. He was desperate to prove to the Poison King that his lineage was the one that truly reigned supreme. Gyoso delivered a heavy overhead strike and laughed as Dujin stumbled. In that split second, Gyoso executed a cruel ambush, aiming a crushing blow directly at Dujin's hand. This was the precise moment of vulnerability he had been hunting for since the start. The agony of the impact sent Dujin crashing to the stage floor. As Dujin writhed in pain, Gyoso prepared to lunge in for a final, bone-breaking finishing move. Suddenly, Mujin hurled the blue bag into the ring, forcing an immediate halt to the violence. Gyoso smirked with arrogance, convinced he had already broken the boy's spirit. Mujin pulled Dujin aside to inspect the damage. He saw that Gyoso had maliciously targeted the joints. Mujin braced his brother and firmly popped the dislocated bone back into its socket. Dujin let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed throughout the entire arena. Once finished, Mujin warned that the bone was set, but gripping a sword would be excruciating. He gave Dujin the choice to quit, but Dujin looked him in the eye and begged him to lash his hand to the wooden blade. Mujin felt a surge of pride at his brother's unbreakable resolve. He immediately bound the sword to Dujin's hand as requested. With the weapon secured, Dujin stepped back into the ring with a terrifying focus. Tang marveled at the boy's legendary courage. Mujin noted that this was the bare minimum expected from someone bearing the Hua family name. When Gyoso saw him return, he acted shocked that Dujin hadn't crawled away to safety. Gyoso sneered, telling Dujin he was about to experience the same tragedy that had broken Mujin years ago. Mujin's eyes darkened at the mention of his past, as Gyoso charged forward, his mouth spilling venomous plans to turn the brothers into a pair of cripples. That's all for now. If you're hooked, drop a next part in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, ring the bell, and like the video. Thanks for watching, and catch you in the next one.